Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of public service announcements first. There isn't a fire drill planned, and as we had one last night at Policy and Resources Committee, I would probably think we're not likely to have one. But if the fire alarm does go off, we will see what Democratic Services can find out about the situation, and they will come back, hopefully, and tell us a safe route out of the building should that be necessary. Second point, as everyone who's been here before and many other people may well know, the Council is in the habit of recording its proceedings for posterity and also broadcasting them live. Can I ask if anyone else is likely to be recording these? Councillor Mackay? Anyone else? No. That's not to stop anyone doing it, it's just so people are aware that recording is taking place. Third and final housekeeping point. We are discussing, which is not unusual, a number of controversial applications this evening. I expect people on both sides of the argument, councillors, planning agents, objectors, to behave calmly, not to boo or hiss or applaud. If such events do occur, or waving of banners, the meeting will be halted while the public who have been involved in such activities are asked to leave, and will not resume until that has happened. Hopefully we will not have that situation. So now we turn to the agenda for this evening. That's all right. Welcome, Councillor. First of all, apologies for absence. I've had an additional apology from Councillor Bartlett, and we already had them from Councillor Round. Are there any substitute members? No, apparently not. So, item 3, notification of visiting members. We'll start in the middle there with Councillor Powell. If you come forward and tell me what item you're here for.
Yeah, Councillor Powell here is a resident tonight talking about the Riverwood application at Harwich.
Councillor Mackay, please.
Councillor Malcolm Mackay, Councillor for Shepway South. I'm here tonight to talk on what was agenda item 14, land of west of Church Road.
And is Councillor Newton here? Councillor Newton.
Councillor Gordon Newton, member for Downswood and Ottham, speaking on land west of Church Road, Ottham. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's everyone, but if I've missed anyone, would you please indicate? No. Okay, thank you. Items withdrawn from the agenda. I'm not aware of any items to be withdrawn, so that's none, I think. The date of the adjourned meeting, should we need one, is the 31st of October, which may or may not be appropriate as it's Halloween. I would hope that we do conclude the business this evening, but should we approach the halfway stage and I think that any items are likely to be adjourned, I will let people know who are likely to be affected at that point so they don't sit here to the bitter end and then have to come back again. Item 6, any business the Chairman regards as urgent, including the urgent update report as it relates to matters to be considered at the meeting. Is it agreed we take any urgent updates? Thank you. Item 7, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? Councillor Mumford.
Item 17 is in my ward. I don't take part in the planning meetings. I was asked for advice, but that was to do with our constitution, but was applicable to this application. I've not made my mind up yet, so therefore I will speak and I will vote.
Thank you, Councillor. Obviously, giving advice on procedure doesn't involve you in determining the application. Item 8, disclosures of lobbying. I'm sorry, Councillor Perry, I didn't see you.
No, it's me, I should apologise. I put my hand up rather late. No, it's agenda item 15. It's land south of the Gables. I haven't taken part in any of the planning discussions at the parish council, and I will. I'll listen to. I want to listen to what's being said tonight, and I'll vote accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Perry, that, as is normal in your case in Staplehurst. Any other? Councillor Spooner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must admit that, like Councillor John Perry, I was a bit slow in putting my hand up. I too would like to declare that on item 14, I am a member of Bearsted Parish Council. I noticed the Parish Council has commented upon the application. I was not a member of that committee that considered the matter, and I therefore intend to speak and vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spooner. Is there anyone else I missed? No, good. Right, disclosures of lobbying we will take with the relevant applications, because otherwise it all gets a bit confused. Item 9, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. There are no exempt reports this evening, and I don't expect any exempt information issues to arise, so I will take the entire agenda in public. Is that agreed? Thank you, members. Minutes of the meeting of the 26th of September. These have all been circulated. Are there any corrections to those minutes? No? In that case, I will sign them in due course. Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you. Item 11, presentation of petitions, if any. I don't believe there are any petitions this evening. Item 12, deferred items.
Thank you, Chair. There is no update on progress on either of the deferred items. One of them has been in abeyance for some months, so I'll ask the case officer to bring it to a conclusion one way or the other.
Right. Thank you. Leaving people in abeyance is unfortunate. It's not a pleasant destination. We turn now to the applications on the agenda this evening. And the first application we are considering, and this is obviously a change to the order, is item 14, page 25. In accordance with the normal procedure, I'll ask the officers to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this is an outline application for up to 440 houses, with access only being sought by the applicant at this stage. I'll quickly run through the site and the location. As many of you probably know, that the site's mainly made up of a single arable field, apart from a section in this northeast corner that's a sort of scrub area with a number of trees in there. The access points would be off Church Road, which runs along the east side of the site. We've got St Nicholas Church, Grade 1 listed here, and Church House, which is Grade 2 listed behind it. We've got the Downswood Housing Estate to the north, and then to the west, again, a housing estate, but next to the site here, Chapman Avenue, which is at a much lower level than the application site. To the south, we've got the housing off Woolly Road, and just in the southeast corner here, there's an area of ancient woodland, and there's a cluster or a number of houses just here to the south, including the rectory, which is Grade 2 listed. Quickly run through the photographs. So this is a view from Church Road, and this is the site frontage where the two access points would come in, one further north to the church and one sort of roughly around here, and obviously you can see the church spire in the distance there. This is almost just hopping the other side of that hedge, so it's just showing you the front of the site where the two access points would come in. This is on the left, you've got the hedge along the front of the site, so we've got the church behind us, and the rectory is, you can't quite see it, but the rectory, the Grade 2 listed buildings within there, and the site sort of extends off to the south. This is same position, but we're now looking towards Chapman Avenue, which is sort of hidden below because it's at a lower level behind those trees. This is in the corner with Chapman Avenues just to the right here, and that's looking up towards the south end and Woolly Road, and that's just showing the boundary with the properties on Woolly Road, and that's looking back down north down the site, and you can see the slope on the site there, and just see the church off to the side there. So this is an outline application, as I said, only access is being considered. But whilst we are considering the principle of 440 houses, we're not deciding how they're going to be laid out or they're designed. We are making a decision on the 2 proposed access points, though. And this plan is just showing where those are. We've got there's 2 access points, one just to the south of the church, you can see here, and then another at the southern end at the frontage there. As it says in the report, that will result in hedge removal, but condition 7 will ensure that we can secure appropriate strengthening and replacement of that hedging. Now, as I said, we're not dealing with the layout and all of the detail. However, there is the applicant has submitted what's called a parameter plan, and this is to show where the development areas are likely to go and the landscape buffers that would be free of development. And the reason for this plan is the applicant's trying to demonstrate that they can comply with the policy, and it provides surety and it guides the future reserve matters. So we have secured this under condition 3. What you can see is that the development areas, this sort of yellow, and then the buffers and the areas that wouldn't have development on the east here, around the church, to the north here, and the yellow is again sort of buffers around the edges of the site. So there is a condition that would secure that, so it's those sort of parameters. So I'll just go through some of the key issues. There's obviously quite a lot, but I'll try and keep it brief and sort of centre it around the policy, the site policy. So as I say, site is allocated for 440 houses in the local plan. That's subject to various criteria being met. Now, vehicular access, there would be 2 points, and that would be from Church Road only, and that's in line with the site policy. There would be connections through to the local area in the northeast corner here, linking up with Church Road, also in the northwest corner, linking here, and then also to the south through council-owned land through Woolly Road. With regard to the design and layout, as I say, we're not considering the precise layout, but this parameter plan shows that the development could comply or can comply with the site policy. It provides the necessary protections and buffers to the west and to the east boundaries, and also to the ancient woodland here. St Nicholas Church is Grade 1 listed, as I said, but the parameter plan ensures an undeveloped section of land along the eastern edge, respecting its setting and maintaining views from Church Road as is required by the site policy. In addition, further open space would be maintained around the building. As it says in the report, this allocation inevitably results in some harm to the setting of the church and indeed church house behind. However, we consider that this impact would be minimised by the development buffers, and the less than substantial harm would be outweighed by the public benefits. In terms of open space, the policy requires just under 3 hectares, and this can be provided. But obviously that detail would come through at a later stage, but condition 5 secures that amount. With regard to highways impacts, the site policy lifts strategic highways and transportation improvements which are required for all of the southeast Maidstone sites. These measures were found to be sound and suitable by the local plan inspector, such that the impacts on congestion are not severe. As these requirements are based on cumulative traffic impacts, compliance with this is via SIL payments that would be paid should the application be approved and implemented. KCC Highways are once again objecting based on what they consider will be a severe impact on the wider network. This is the same position taken at the local plan inquiry, which was examined in great detail by the inspector, and indeed on other planning applications that have been before committee in South East Maidstone. Despite KCC Highways' views and their evidence, the local plan inspector found that the mitigation measures advanced by the council were acceptable, such that the impacts were not severe. In addition, the council has granted planning permission on this basis on the other South East sites. It's therefore considered that a refusal on such grounds would be unreasonable and inconsistent. In terms of more local highways issues, KCC Highways are objecting on the basis of the narrowness of Church Road to the south of the site. And it certainly is the case that the road narrows in places so vehicles have to slow or stop. But the development would only add just over 1 extra journey a minute at peak times. And there is currently a low incidence of accidents on this road. So on balance, this is not considered to be reasonable grounds to refuse planning permission. Improvements to Church Road include extending the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit along the road and a new give-way build-out feature, which would help where visibility is more limited. KCC have sought clarification on that feature, which has been provided this week, and they are now not raising any objections to that feature. Still maintain the objection on Church Road in general. There would be junction improvements where Church Road meets Derringwood Drive, to which there are no objections. As members will see, there's signalisation is proposed at Derringwood Drive where it meets Willington Street to help alleviate the queuing that already occurs. Now that's going to increase notwithstanding this development, so the applicants put that forward as something to help with that. Now KCC acknowledge there is an issue at that junction, but they also don't want to see any delays on the Willington Street corridor, so they're not accepting this proposal at this stage. They also consider there's unresolved safety, so that's why we're seeking delegated powers to resolve that with KCC, and if that can't be resolved, we will come back to the planning committee. The development will add minor queuing to the Spot Lane junction, but this is not considered to be a level that's severe, dangerous or warrant refusal. All other relevant issues are outlined in the committee report, and permission is recommended with delegated powers to resolve those issues. And as I say, if those can't be resolved, then we would come back to planning committee with a recommendation. In terms of updates, we've received some further comments today stating that insufficient time has been given before the planning committee, but I can confirm there's been the standard 5 working days notice. There's also a very late representation regarding a survey saying that it's not been available. This was a survey in response to KCC Archaeology have been consulted and don't raise any objections. And then finally, I received written confirmation from Highways England at 5:15 stating that they've reviewed the evidence and they consider there is capacity at Junction 7, so they've removed their objection. So the Highways England objection has been removed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Timms. I'm just going to ask the legal officer to outline how the public speaking works for this evening.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a short announcement for members of the public, and in particular those who are speaking on an item this evening. As you've just heard, the item is announced by the Chairman, and then the Planning Officer introduces the item. The Chairman will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please could you come forward to the table in front of you and take a seat. To speak, press the middle button. You do not need to hold it down. And the button will turn green and the ring around the mouthpiece on the microphone will turn red. You will have 3 minutes to speak and you'll see your time counting down on the screen in the corner behind me. At the end of the 3 minutes, the Chairman will tell you when your time is up. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button again on the microphone unit. It'll turn white and then return to your seat. You may hear some of the speakers referred to as visiting members. They are members of the council, but they don't sit on this committee. They also have 3 minutes to speak, but they have no right to vote on any of the applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Pardon me, I'm a little hoarse this evening. Our first speaker this evening is Miss Skip, an objector. If you'd like to come forward, please.
Hello. Hello, my name is Sue Skip. I'm a long-standing resident of the Chapman Avenue area, and as such, I feel I know the locality well. The desire of Maidstone Borough Council to build 440 houses on a parcel of agricultural land to the west of Church Road leads me to believe that the councillors involved in decision-making do not know this area well. The land lies adjacent to Church Road, which is a narrow country lane bounded on both sides by tall ancient hedges. The road is not sufficient to accommodate the traffic from 400 dwellings. Maidstone Borough Council local plan states that Developments should not result in unacceptable traffic levels on nearby roads and should not bring about unsympathetic change to a rural lane. That's a quote. Traffic will spill out onto Willington Street or Spot Lane, both of which are heavily overloaded already, and suggestion of traffic lights at Willington Street Daringwood Drive Junction will merely make the traffic worse on nearby roads. In order to make way for buses and emergency vehicles on Church Road, the majority of the ancient hedge will need to be removed, despite the protection of important hedges under hedgerow legislation of 1997. Hedges are of great conservation value, providing continuous habitat for a multitude of species. Once removed, their value is irreplaceable. The beautiful church of St Nicholas currently sits within its impressive rural setting. To swamp this feature with 440 houses will seriously impact on its significance and beauty. Planning guidance clearly states that development should be sympathetic to local character and history, including landscape setting. I feel the development will be incongruous and visually obtrusive. Why is planning guidance not being adhered to here? Geological surveys of the ground for development have revealed it to be located within an area of high risk of swallow holes developing. Paragraph 178 of the National Planning Policy Framework says that sites should consider ground conditions and risk of ground instability. Why is planning guidance not being considered? Local services and amenities in the area are already stretched, with schools and doctors oversubscribed. Planning guidance suggests that development should achieve appropriate densities, taking into account availability and capacity of infrastructure and services. Once again, the guidance is not being followed. I don't think this development is appropriate in any way for this location. Bad planning all round. The planning inspector clearly believed that problems relating to this site could be overcome, but evidence provided by residents and statutory
I'm sorry, Ms.
bodies...
Skip, that's 3 minutes. But I know it goes very quickly.
illustrate they cannot.
Okay. But I think we got definitely the gist of that. Councillor Hipkins, Otham Parish Council, please.
Hello, I'm Kevin Hipkins. I'm Chair of Otham Parish Council. The Parish Council objects to the development H18 in 2 important aspects. The setting of the Domesday recorded 11th century Grade 1 listed St Nicholas Church will be severely compromised, interrupting the views to and from the Otham Conservation Area. Building so close to the church may have a significant effect on its foundations. We require clarification as to why Historic England's serious concerns, in inverted commas, about this change so dramatically following a meeting between council officers and the developer. We do not agree that a large tarmac car park on the south side of the church will provide a heritage benefit. To the contrary, a car park will damage the setting of the church and the 2 Grade 2 listed properties nearby. A car park here cannot be built to facilitate residents of a housing estate. We feel NPPF proposals affecting heritage assets, section 1 to 90, supports this. We also have concerns about the effect of increasing traffic on Church Road, described by Iceni as an already peaceful rural highway. The volume of traffic is already set to increase substantially from the developments at Bicknor Wood at the southern end of Church Road, with an undoubted tendency to rat run to the M20 via Downswood through Daringwood Drive and Spot Lane. We note the continued objection by KCC Highways to the existing proposal for dealing with this increased traffic. The work undertaken by Iceni is confusing in its findings. Acknowledging the increased pressure of an already failing junction with Willington Street, the report suggests excess traffic will use Spot Lane to get to the A20 and hence to junction 8 of the M20. This is already a traffic-calmed road through a residential area. In summary, We feel the setting and hence striking beauty of St Nicholas will be damaged by this development. The resulting increase in traffic already contributed to by the new developments at the southern end of Church Road will make Downswood a traffic black spot. Thank you.
Councillor Weeks, Downswood Parish Council, please.
Downswood Parish Council have raised comprehensive, factual and reasoned objections to both the original and amended application for the proposed development at Church Road, Ottham. If you have not already done so, you really must see these and study these before you consider this planning application. Although the proposed development falls technically within the parish of Ottham, it is some distance from the main Ottham village and abuts the boundary with Downswood and will have a far greater impact to Downswood residents. The depth of feeling shown by our parishioners is clearly demonstrated by the number of objections raised directly by residents. Residents driving to work already have to tolerate the existing traffic congestion daily. Pedestrians, including parents taking their children to school, see increasing numbers of rat-running vehicles speeding past them, especially on Church Road, Derringwood Drive, Mallard's Way and Spot Lane, in spite of existing traffic calming measures. We have clearly identified that there is missing information supplied by the developer's consultants, not available on the planning portal for public to inspect, such as the specific response to DPC's own initial comprehensive objection. Mistaken information supplied by the developer's consultants, such as where facilities exist, that extensive rat running already takes place, and where heavy traffic congestion already occurs daily during the peak hours at the proposed traffic exit junctions. Misleading information supplied by the developer's consultants, such as junction improvements claimed to mitigate, but that in reality overlook the further problems that would be created with the addition of the committed development. Church Road is a country lane, extremely narrow in places, with little opportunity to widen without impacting on ancient hedgerows. In several places close to the entrance of the proposed development, it is not possible for two vehicles to pass easily, and this road is certainly not suitable to be the sole ingress and egress route for a further 440 homes. If for one moment you believe that any of the mitigation measures proposed will have any effect on reducing the danger and foolishness of allowing this, then you are sadly mistaken. We appeal to you that common sense must be allowed to prevail, and the existing residents in Downswood and the surrounding areas must be protected, not exposed to worsening conditions by you, their elected members. I would certainly urge members of the Planning Committee not to make any decision until you have at the very least studied carefully our written objections and joined us at the proposed site to witness at first hand the stupidity of allowing this development to proceed. This application, with its sole access onto Church Road, must be refused.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Woodhead for the applicant, please.
Thank you, Chair and members, for the opportunity to speak. This is an existing allocation in the adopted local plan, and this is an outline application. This has come a long way in its preparation to this point, and we've had over 2 years of liaison and a number of meetings with both Ottham and Downswood parish councils, including walking the site, walking the roads, looking at the local issues. This has been coupled with extensive consultation with officers, consultees, including KCC, Historic England, Highways England, to name but a few. Whilst we understand the local in-principle objection to any development here, it is part of the local plan and key to the borough's housing numbers, with the principle of the site accepted and adopted. The housing numbers from this site are also in the council's 5-year supply calculation. The scheme is fully in line with the policy, including the overall numbers and the affordable provision. What we've been trying to do is work through any local issues that we can improve with this application. And this liaison has led to a number of things over and above the policy, which we've included in the application. The first is the car park next to the church on Bellway's land, in order to help an existing issue of parking and congestion on Church Road when the active church has its many community events. This is a real benefit of the application, and it was requested by the parish, Historic England and the diocese, with Historic England even saying that it is now a tangible benefit to the scheme. In working with Maidstone Council's property team, we've also included a pedestrian and cycle link to Woolly Road, which links the houses southwards to the primary school, shops and bus stops. Again, this was requested by the parish and was not in the policy. The policy requires us to access by vehicles from Church Road only. We've done this, but we've included 2 points of access rather than 1. This again was at the parish request, and also to allow for a loop road for internal buses to come in and out of the site. We've been liaising with Historic England about the listed church and the other listed properties, and they requested a larger buffer of landscaping around the church. We therefore increased this buffer, and this, along with the car park, has led to them supporting the application. We walked the local roads with the parish and highway consultants, and we looked at the local issues, and this has led to a number of junction improvements and also a traffic calming build-out feature on Church Road, which I understand KCC are now happy with the design of. Again, this is not a requirement of the scheme, but requested by the parish to help locally. The final issue is with Derringwood Drive, Willington Street junction, and whilst not in the policy to improve it, we've designed a traffic lighted junction which would allow safe and controlled exit onto Willington Street. This is an existing issue, and we're working with Maidstone and KCC to help resolve, and we're happy to continue with this work and look for other options with them following the delegated recommendation of the officers. Hopefully you can see we have tried to work openly and positively and are committed to doing so. There are many benefits. Okay. Thank you.
The next speaker is Councillor Newton.
Thank you, members. I trust you have all been and seen where this location is, which I did ask for. The previous gentleman said that the parish councils had been consulted and it was agreed. It was not, and that is a totally incorrect statement. The other point is traffic lights. Now, this is KCC's area of expertise. I don't know whether they've considered the stopping distance of a 40-ton lorry coming down the hill in Willington Street in the icy weather, wet weather, bad visibility. They take a lot of stopping. I'm an HGV driver, believe it or not, but also they take a lot of starting because they have to start in low gear to get up that incline, which will in fact create chaos. It'll create an additional traffic issue here. I'm not going to go back on what the other members have said, but I will say that that church, St Nicholas Church, was there in 1086 because it is in the Doomsday Book. Now, to put a car park in front of there, eating into the buffer area that had been discussed, is actually almost a criminal action. It is destroying the setting of that church. The thing that's destroying that setting of that church is 440 houses in that field. And, you know, that's the destruction of a Grade 1 listed building. Nobody knows how it was built. They're usually built on a raft of rubble. And anything that goes on on this site will potentially damage that church. Already, for those that have been to that site, will have seen the wall has collapsed on the outer side along Church Road. So the vibrations are damaging the structure. There are so many other bits, so many other points in this that you've read them because you've had them the same as I have. But what I would suggest, and I would like to see this, the traffic issues are serious ones, very serious. There are children, there are horses ride in Church Road, cycles going up there. They're in danger. The children are in danger. And if you, believe me, if you approve this, think about the children that will lose their lives. It's very, very congested. I've been almost hit once by a vehicle, so down there. But anyway, I'm coming to the end of my time, but please...
You've actually come to your end of your time.
Yeah, refuse this application.
Ladies and gentlemen, please. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee. This is, in fact, the first time I have addressed the committee as a visiting member. And you may know, broadly, I am supportive of the need to provide housing. If you have had the opportunity to look at the site, you have seen clearly the issues. The evidence shows that this is an unacceptable site on highway grounds alone. The land west of Church Road is a field which would have access onto what is little more than a church lane, lined with hedgerow. No footpaths. If you exit to the south, one car can pass at a time. Exiting to the north towards downward, two cars may pass just, but not a car and an ambulance. Not a car or a bus. Certainly not a car and a fire engine, or any HGV. In fact, there are signs at the end of Church Road advising motorists that it's not suitable for HGVs. These are not my views, but taken, certainly in part, from Kent County Council's assessment. I was a councillor when this was included in the local plan, quite late in 2016, against the backdrop of growing pressure to meet housing numbers required to satisfy Maidstone Borough Council's target. I believe, in hindsight, that this site, H18 as it was then called, never should have been considered or included. You finished? But it is not too late to right a wrong. As Winston Churchill said, plans are of little importance, but planning is essential. That said, the experts on highway matters is KCC. It is not Maidstone Borough Council. So what did Kent County Council have to say? In June, the residential traffic impact on the network will be unacceptably severe, and KCC Highways strongly object to the development proposals on this basis. KCC Highways must raise further objections based on the additional hazards for road users that could be created. Kent County Council in August said, KCC Highways wish to maintain the objections previously raised regarding the unacceptability of severe traffic impact on highway network.
Can you draw to a close now, Malcolm?
Any decision other than to refuse application would find the face of evidence presented, plus be irrational and open to review.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to bring in the two relevant further officers in a moment. I think I do have to say a couple of points at this stage. The addition of this site, as Dr. Spate has drawn our attention to, was not this council's procedurally finest hour and was highly controversial. Nevertheless, at the time, but nevertheless it was added. It is part of the local plan. It's gone through the inspector's review process. Consequently, the principle of development at this site has been established. No, shake your head lower you like, but that is the fact. However, that does not mean that any particular application has to be approved in line if there are reasons, material considerations related to that application, in other words, the one we have tonight, that mitigate against approving it. That is the position. It may not be the position that everyone would like, but that is the case. Now, having said, and there are a lot of things that need to be, in my opinion, and this is now an opinion rather than a statement of fact, that I feel need to be explored further before I would feel comfortable actually determining the application one way or the other. So I will come back to that later. But I think there are a lot of issues here that need to be explored further and certain things that need to be considered. Just to give an example, the controversial car park has been mentioned. Well, Historic England believe that to be a net benefit. If this committee decided it wasn't a net benefit and the setting of the listed building was more important, it could be deleted, for example. That's just one example. And there are a number of other issues, quite a lot of issues, so it may well be that what I am not comfortable with is granting a delegated authority to go away and explore some of those issues. I will come back to this later, but it may be that the right approach would need not to grant tonight and with a delegation, but to actually establish whether or not there are further issues that need to be explored and to actually defer for those consideration of the details, and there's a lot of detail, for further discussion and come back to this committee, which might, and the details may not be sortable, and that may well be at that stage that we have to make a determination on those grounds, or they may be resolvable, or some and some, but I'm not personally minded to grant such significant outstanding issues to be dealt with by delegation. I'm sorry if that's a little blunt, but these are matters of overwhelming public interest in both senses of the word, and I think that whatever decision is reached, we have to have a process that is open, transparent, and potentially involves further consultation with local state members and parish councils. At this point, I've said enough, and I'm going to bring in, first of all, the highway officer.
Thank you, Chairman. The Highways Authority's objections to this planning application are twofold. The first objection relates to the narrow carriageway width and limited forward visibility on Church Road and the highway safety implications associated with the additional traffic movements generated by the proposed development. The highway improvements put forward by the applicant have only partially addressed the inadequacies of the road. The section of Church Road to the south of the site, up to the White Horse Lane junction, will largely remain as existing, with the carriageway width as narrow as 3.9 metres in places. It does not therefore accommodate continuous two-way traffic flow, and when considered alongside the limited forward visibility, there is the prospect of increased hazardous conflicts between road users. Such conflicts are detrimental to highway safety, and an objection is raised on this basis. The second objection relates to the severe worsening of congestion on the local highway network. The applicant's transport assessment has confirmed that the development will add to the traffic volumes on the heavily congested A274-A229 corridor into Maidstone. In the absence of proposals that can provide effective mitigation, the cumulative residual impact on queuing and delay will be severe. The transport assessment also indicated that this congestion, coupled with the additional development traffic, will place further pressure on the minor roads that are routinely used to avoid the worst of the delays. This will result in queuing and delay occurring at the Willington Street, Derringwood Drive and Ashford Road Spot Lane junctions. The applicant has not demonstrated that suitable mitigation can be achieved, which serves to further amplify the severe impact that will arise on the highway network. Thank you.
Just briefly, if there are any questions members have at this stage of the highway officer that are vital, and are not, I think now is the time to ask. No, in that case, I'll ask the conservation officer to come in.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think the most significant issue is the church and the setting of the church, and I would absolutely stress and agree with everybody that the church is an exceptional building of grade 1 listed and therefore of exceptional significance. And it's absolutely true to say that the setting of the church contributes to its significance. I would also point out that the setting of the church has to a degree evolved in the past couple of centuries, so it's looked largely the same for the last 100 years or so, but it has definitely evolved. For example, in earlier times there was a more heavy woodland to the south of the site. What is also important to the setting, the significance of the church, is the use of the church and its ongoing use. So this perhaps leads me on to the car park issue, and while myself and my colleagues have shared concerns about the potential visual impact of the car park, I can also understand why Historic England are of the view that it could be considered a tangible heritage benefit. The NPPF and planning practice guidance make it clear that a public benefit, a heritage benefit, can include contributing to the ongoing viable use of a building. So in contributing to the ongoing function of the church, I would see that providing a car park does actually make some sense. I would gain some comfort in it, in sort of impact terms, in the potential harm of that impact, potentially by conditioning the final detail and perhaps the surfacing of the car park, looking to the numerous examples and precedents of high quality car parks near very significant heritage sites, National Trust properties, churches and so on. So I do feel that can be slightly mitigated. In terms of the overall impact on the setting of the church, I do believe that there will be harm, and I do believe that would be less than substantial harm. I also feel that steps have been taken to minimise that impact, i.e. maintaining views along Church Lane and providing a certain degree of buffer. Ideally that would be greater. And there are public benefits that can be demonstrated to outweigh that harm. So I feel that I agree with the recommendation.
Well, thank you. There are obviously several different ways we could take that in terms of the car park specifically. Councillor Harwood, I think you indicated very early, so I will go to you first.
Right, thank you very much, Chairman. I don't really need to reiterate this, but we are a quasi-judicial regulatory committee, and in terms of this application, we must be clear-sighted and we must be resolute in our decisions, but we must also be honest that the determination around housing on this site is a done deal. The decision was made by another policy committee and by the full council, and then a government planning inspector has rubber-stamped it. So we cannot play to the gallery. These are the really important decisions for local residents they're going to have to live with for their whole lives and those generations to come. I think the same applies, it's got to be said, to some of the highways comments. This argument has already taken place. I sat and watched it, and the government planning inspector, who is the higher power in this, made the determination that 440 units could go onto this site. So as much as we can have statements about the Highway Authority opposing it, it would not stand up at an appeal because of the local plan policy which was approved. So, you know, I just want to set the parameters. We talked about parameters plans, but that is a parameter and that is a given. This is an outline planning application with only the means of access to be agreed tonight. So some of the points around delegations I think are quite significant because we really need to shape this development, and many of us were at pre-application discussions. We've been at very many meetings discussing the detail of this scheme, and some of the latter changes I don't like very much, like putting a car park, and there's form for this. In my patch I have another historic building where again these stakeholders for various reasons want big car parks around it. We are the planning authority. We have the ability to say yay or nay. And I think such an ancient church should not be surrounded by a sea of tarmac. We should in fact try and reinstate the landscape it sat in. If you look at the older maps of the site, as mentioned by our conservation officer, it actually sat in woodland. It didn't sit in an arable field. That arable field is a relatively recent innovation. Right, I come back to the outline as it is. I am genuinely unhappy about punching 2 holes through the hedgerow. I much preferred it when the original concept drawing showed 1 access and maybe an emergency smaller access. However, I understand that the parish council and others are quite keen that that take place, so we need to try and mitigate that damage, because that's what we're really talking about, is highways access. To me, the critical mitigation there, we talk about an ancient church, there's a much more ancient woodland at the southern end of the site. That woodland has shrunk to an unsustainably small size. It is now ecologically at the edges of being able to exist. So therefore, if we look at this, the drawing, the parameter drawing that was flagged up, if we see the block of ancient woodland on the southern end of the site, we show a 15-metre yellow buffer. Effectively, I would much rather some of these open spaces, these big green blobs, which will be surrounded by a sea of red brick and new housing, what we should be doing is putting that open space down at that southern end of the site, so we're actually protecting the ancient woodland, we're protecting the link into the fields, which is the local bit of countryside for residents, and actually create a sustainable area of open space. And so therefore I suggest that the proposed parameter policies, particularly 4 and particularly 7, should be renegotiated to emphasise the 2 heritage assets relating to this site. One is the church, the other is the ancient woodland. And frankly, it's not about creating something which isn't there yet, it's about protecting what is there. And what's important in terms of parameters is that ancient woodland, and it is the Grade 1 St Nicholas Church. So I think that suggests that the car park is a bad idea. There are other ways of getting that parking. Currently, the people park on Church Road, Church Lane, depending on what you call it. Yes. I suggest there are ways of enabling parking on the access roads, whether that be lay-lys, there are other ways of doing it other than surrounding that church in a sea of tarmac. So I think that is a critical point. The other issue which is concerning me is that we've talked about a local plan. I mean, I certainly didn't support the ratification of that local plan, but we did have a gun against our head that if we hadn't signed it off, we would have had a free-for-all in terms of development in this borough, because that was the way the government phrased it. Since that point, we know that the government has imposed an uplift of about 40% additional housing that will follow through after the next review. So that, and essentially, you know, that's not just this government, it's political parties of all colours are saying that housing is and no one is going to reduce that. So we have to acknowledge it. But what we are going to have to do, if we're going to build all these houses, is we're going to have to ensure that this housing is sustainable. And we know that we cannot use fossil fuel heating systems anymore. And frankly, to hit our targets, we're going to have to tear them all out. And it costs a huge amount of money to replace all those gas boilers with electric. So at this point, early, when it's most cost effective, we need to ensure that we have the most sustainable and the least polluting energy use on this site. So I think we need to flag that up in terms of the parameters, you know, because by the time this is developed, we will be into a new planning regime probably anyway. So we need to flag it up early so that we don't get hoist.
Can I ask you to move to a
I do.
conclusion, Councillor?
And then the final point in relation to this is some of the points that have been raised around the fact that, you know, we know there are quarries in this area, we know what the underlying geology is like. We really need to bottom out the sustainable drainage issues in a way that really, really works. And again, I would like that drawn out specifically in relation to the policies. So, with those points taken on board, I'm prepared to move that we do grant outline permission and the accesses which are proposed, but I ask that those changes flagged up are put in. I don't think there is any mileage in a more significant deferral, because it's just putting off the inevitable. But where I do agree with the chairman is that all we are agreeing tonight is the principle of the development, the outline, and those two access links. The other detail needs to be refined, it needs to be worked up, and it needs to be members that make that decision. Thank you.
I assume you are moving a deferral because we can't approve it and defer some of it, because if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I'm moving essentially what's on paper to those.
Right. Can I just get this right? We've got the issue around the car park, we've got the issue around restoring the landscaping around the church, we've got the issue about the southern ancient woodland, we've got issues about sustainability, SUDS. What else have I missed?
Yeah, and the SUDS on the
yeah,
drainage
I said
issue.
sustainable drainage.
I mean, that's, I think, all we can do at this point.
Well, I think, to be honest, whilst we may or may not reach a solution, I think we should be holding further discussions with the Highway Authority on these issues to see whether we can come to an agreed position or not on some of these. If we're going to have a deferral, we need to talk about it further. There is an issue that's come up, not the general issues about the policy and the standing objection, but the issues about the signalisation and the handling of Church Road. I do think if we're going to have a deferral, we probably should look at those at least.
Right, Chairman, I mean, as you know, we have very detailed discussions where we were trying to make this development very much face towards the Seneca Way, so that it linked into the local schools there and the local bus service and so on, rather than do anything to encourage pedestrian traffic and other issues out onto Church Road, Stroke Lane.
And I understand that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the off-site issues, I was not at the chairman's briefing, so if you are privy to further detail where there is some mileage, I suggest that you need to attach that to the list of issues to tackle.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, because the officers were originally seeking delegated powers to discuss the highway issues further with the county council as part of this. If we're having deferral, then it logically follows, I'm going to bring Councillor Perry and then Mr Timms can address some of these issues. Seems to me logical that if that was the wish in the recommendation, that we should actually be including that in a deferral, unless I've got something completely wrong, because obviously officers think there's something further to discuss.
Right,
I'm not willing to delegate it because we don't know what we'll end up with then.
No, in that case, I'm happy as part of my proposal to remove the delegation, that yes, there'll be discussions with officers, but whatever emerge from the discussions with officers must come back to members, so we remove the delegation on the off-site highways improvement.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely agreed.
Okay, and then on that basis, I will second what you propose. Councillor Perry, you've been very patient.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I almost thought I was in the wrong meeting, actually. But so, I take a simple view of this, and I read the papers very carefully, and I've also been lobbied as well. So I will say that. The issue for me, I mean, I regret this ever got in the local plan. I think it was a hell of a mistake, and I totally agree with what Councillor Mackay said, actually, because, I mean, and I certainly didn't vote for the local plan, but that's neither here nor there. What gets me on this, and why I would actually like to see it refused, is because of the view of Kent Highways. If this is severe, and I drive up the 274 on a pretty regular basis, and I know what the congestion is like on that road, and they're saying it's actually going to get worse. If you put 440 houses down a country lane, I also live in a country lane with a very similar road, and I know this area very well, I think it's a recipe for disaster, quite frankly. I don't think it should ever got through. And if we have the, and also I noticed in the officer's report, para 6.02, it does actually say that it's subject, it was in its policy, but it's subject to a number of criterion, and that includes highways, transportation, and various other issues. So, and this is clearly a highways issue. And if you live in 440 houses, which is probably about 600 additional cars, I'm not sure how that's going to actually work. I can't accept this. If Kent Highways say it is severe, and so that's a very important statement in my view, then I'm afraid I would refuse this. I'm sorry, but that's exactly... I understand the heritage issues as well, and I think but the congestion issues on the road and the fact that it is designated as a severe effect, I think that's really, really, really important. And I'm afraid I would like to refuse this. If necessary, I'll propose that. Thank you.
Well, any applause and we will clear the room. Or any cheering either, come on the other side. Councillor Perry, we can refuse an application, right? What we cannot, for particular reasons, what we cannot do is say this allocation is unacceptable. If we do that, all you're doing is basically misleading the people here by telling them something that cannot happen. There cannot be an in-principle objection. The argument that was given by Kent Highways has been tested by the government and found wanting by the local planning inspector. We cannot go back over that. Like you, I did not want this site put in, but it was put in by the cabinet at the time, which was, I won't start casting aspersions, but we all know it wasn't my party. But the fact of the matter is, and I did not, I wasn't in the cabinet that approved it. Now, the fact of the matter is, Councillor Perry, you cannot refuse this on the principle. What you have to do is find a reason related to this particular application. Now, it may be, right, that is the position, right? What we do, no, you cannot use that objection. What you might be able to do, right, in due course, is to say that we have had the discussion about the local road network, not the south of Maidstone road network as a whole, but the local road network, and this particular application and the mitigations for this particular application don't work. Do you see the distinction I'm making? It is a very important distinction. And if you're going to pursue the line that you're taking here, then you have to come up with reasons why this particular solution for this particular iteration of the site doesn't work. Mr. Timms.
Yeah, don't want to sort of go over it too much, but I suppose the case that the cumulative impact of the southeast sites in Maidstone's local plan, that their impact was severe, has been consistently raised by Kent County Council. That was raised at the local plan examination, and Maidstone Council argued that it wasn't severe, including this site, and the local plan inspector found that that was a sound argument. So that's the sort of wider cumulative impact. Now, the large, I think we all know the large housing application at land south of Sutton Road, within it carried out a cumulative assessment of all the sites. It included this site, and the local planning authority, i.e. the planning committee, found that the impact was acceptable as well. So it would be wholly inconsistent to now pick on this application and say that this, cumulatively with other sites that we've accepted, is a severe impact. But I agree with Councillor English, if we then look at specific issues, for example, the width of Church Road to the south, members may find that's an issue they want explored further, and specific issues with this site, then that's fair enough to look at that, but not the wider cumulative impact in South East Maidstone. That's been sort of argued and played out many a time.
Thank you, Mr. Timms. I'm now proceeding to Councillor Spooner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whether we like it or not, we have to accept that the principle of housing development on this site has been agreed by the local planning inspector who conducted the local hearing into the local plan at the end of 2016. So what we're looking at now is the basic parameters of how the site could be developed, and my colleague Councillor Harwood has raised several issues which I think need further looking at. My main concern, though, is with the access and the local road network. I'm very concerned that we have a strong objection from Kent Highways. They are saying there will be an unacceptably severe traffic impact on the local highway network. That is something we cannot dismiss lightly, and I think it's something we need to look at very seriously. I do wonder if there's any mileage, if you pardon the pun, in taking into account the fact that it was in 2016 that the local planning inspector was considering this site, and since then we have seen a massive build-up in traffic. Gridlock in Maidstone is endemic, and it is particularly bad along Spot Lane, Willington Street. Willington Street, Spot Lane are the sort of eastern bypass for Maidstone. The traffic levels are going up all the time, and I fear really for the access out on from Derringwood Drive out onto Willington Street. I fear that there will be absolute gridlock around here. I very much supported what you were saying, Mr. Chairman, earlier on about a deferment. That is something I will be quite happy to support, to see if there is any way that the officers can negotiate and try and overcome these highway objections. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spooner. Councillor Eve.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm in a position where I've lived in Downswood for several years. Up until 3 months ago, I lived at the very bottom of Spot Lane, the last house there. So I was constantly seeing the traffic on local roads, which obviously have yet been impacted by any further development. Now, having only been part of this council since May, I can wash my hands of any decision previously made by the council and planning committee. My conscience is clear. I would have voted against this, but we are where we are. That houses will be built there whether we like it or not. That's not an argument that we're here to make. As some of my colleagues here have mentioned, this is about how we are to deal with what's put in front of us and how to best plan to make it at least effective towards people's lives on a daily basis. Now, I think earlier on at the beginning of the piece, mentioning about issues over accidents on local roads, and I think the comment was that it was minimal or next to nothing. I mean, living where I lived at the bottom of Spot Lane, I lost count of the amount of head-on accidents that I witnessed, heard, had to go out and check on passengers, drivers, pedestrians that were almost hit. And that's prior to the increase of traffic upon local road networks. We can't discuss the wider Maidstone network at all because, again, that was already pre-done prior to any input that I'm able to put in. I do have some major issues over the local roads. Anyone that thinks that Willington Street will be able to manage the increased capacity clearly is incredibly ignorant and naive. Additionally, anybody that thinks that people are going to ignore Spot Lane and Leeds Village as other viable options for this additional traffic to be used is, again, incredibly ignorant and naive. Those are the only two words you can describe. I'd quite happily say that you're stupid, but I think that's probably a bit inappropriate. The extension of the 30-mile-an-hour zone along Church Road, Church Lane. Has anybody been able to drive faster than 30 mile an hour recently? No, I don't, exactly. I don't think it's plausible. So that is by the by. I don't think that's going to make any impact whatsoever. I like the idea. Maybe restrict it down to 10 mile an hour. Maybe we propose and put that in. I mean, there's wider issues that having a development there is going to bring up. Actually, I mean, Councillor Harwood did make some very good points about, about ancient woodland and the idea of having lessen the ecological impact of what this development is going to look like, and I think that needs to be considered prior to anything being agreed. But I think the major issue is around is the road network. It really is. I drive that road daily, every morning and every night. I drive down there to go and get my transport up to London to where I work, so I see it constantly. Now, I see people walking up and down that road at early hours. This is before most people are awake. I can't see them. It's only because I know that people are going to be there just because of the time that they walk. You increase the traffic, you increase the likelihood that a pedestrian is going to get hit. All the time that we're putting passages or walkways through to Senacre and Woolly Road, that's all well and good. But unless you put a prohibition on people being able to walk on a road, which I don't think we have the power to do here today, then we're going to increase the pedestrians on that road. We're going to increase the risk to life. And that's not dramatising it. I've been witness to RTCs. I've been witness to people being knocked over by vehicles and losing their life. I've seen that firsthand. If we approve it as it is on the road network that we've got locally, then all we're going to see is more accidents, more instances, and just local residents, new and current, being heavily impacted by it. And I just don't see how we can approve it as it stands right now, but we must accept that something will be built there. And I don't think we can be ignorant ourselves to think that that is going to change. So,
no, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Atkinson,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's very unusual for KCC Highways to object to any planning application, and the fact that they persist in objecting, I think, is highly significant. I really do. I mean, and also the local plan is under constant review, so I doubt if this site would actually get into another local plan because it's so unsuitable. The road network, as the two members opposite have said, is totally inadequate. In actual fact, I think you could say that there's several good reasons for refusing this application tonight, because policy H18, which everyone is quoting as being sort of justifying this going ahead, actually includes points 13 through to 17 as reasons why planning permission should be granted if these criteria are met. But none of 13 through to 17 have been met. So I feel that we can quite easily refuse this application on the grounds that none of those criteria have been met. And I'd actually like to propose that, rather than go through all the individual details, I'd actually like to propose that the planning permission is refused on the grounds that none of those criteria have been met. So, thank you.
I'm not well, that's a very interesting... Sorry?
On a procedural point, as has been waxed lyrical by many speakers, this is an outline planning application with means of access, the only detail for determination. All of the highways issues raised, I absolutely 1,000% agree. However, that is what we've already agreed as part of the proposal that will come back to members because it's part of the detail. And Church Road, Church Lane will become like an estate road. And the point around maybe making it 10, 20 miles an hour, maybe having traffic calming and so on it, so it's almost more like Weavering Street, if you think, may be the goer.
Councillor Atkinson, it may be at some point that we, in the next few weeks, that we arrive at a position where what you said may be something we can do. But at the moment, we actually really don't have any parameters, which is why I'm actually quite uneasy, because I've sat in many applications over the years, and quite often we'd get to the reserved matters application and the detailed matters application, and the officers and the applicant would say, well, you should have raised that at the outline, right? You're with me so far. Right, we're not in that position. What I would like to see is a situation where we're all better informed and we go away and have this discussion on the points, and I'm going to ask Mr. Tim to outline what is proposed to be deferred. And then we come back and we have either a parameter which we can approve or a parameter which we can, you know, a list of suggestions which we can then be in a more informed position to say, no, that ain't going to work. At the moment, to be honest, there's too many blanks for my liking to do either. So I would plead with people who think that this is likely not to be acceptable to just withhold your judgment for a couple of cycles and see whether it is, because you can still refuse it at that point. But if you follow the argument. Now, I'm just going to ask Mr. Timms to outline what is proposed for discussion under deferral and not proposed.
Thank you, Chair. But just before that, just picking up on Councillor Atkinson's point with the strategic measures in the policy, they are strategic and they're within every South East Maidstone policy. So those measures are required as a cumulative impact. So it's not one site that requires those measures, and the way of delivering those are financial contributions from each of those sites, which have been collected on the others. Now we're in a SIL regime. Money would come through SIL and the council can decide to put that to those measures. But we don't deliver those highways works, and nor does the applicant, so we can't withhold permission because they haven't been put in place. The applicant's way of contributing is providing SIL money, basically. That's outlined in the report. In terms of, just to try and clarify what issues members potentially want us to go away and look at, I've got looking at removal of the car park for the church, looking at providing more open space around the church and around the ancient woodland areas.
And restoring the landscaping around the church, I think, is part of that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is a parameter plan. We're not looking at detail, but I'm sure those things can come through on a parameter plan. I'll come back to a couple of Councillor Harwood's points because I wasn't totally clear. But I think what Councillor English is saying is the outstanding issue with the Willington Street Derringwood Drive, which officers have acknowledged. We need to look at that, see if we can resolve it. If we can't, we come back to Planning Committee, obviously. on Church Road itself, I just want to make clear, outside the site itself, Church Road will be widened slightly to a width that the Highways Authority are okay with. It is to the south of the site where the Church Road narrows. Now, the applicant does own land further south, so members could ask us to go away and look whether there's any potential widening there. It could be done where it doesn't involve ancient woodland, but that's certainly one of the outstanding issues from Kent Highways. And I don't know if members want to look at Spot Lane Junction. Obviously, officers feel that the impact there is not severe. It's not a significant impapt. But if that's...
I think we should include
yeah. And the 2 points I wanted clarification, I think Councillor Harwood's referred to sort of sustainability in SUDS, but I need to know exactly what you're expecting us to sort of look at and provide more information on.
Councillor Harwood, if you could briefly.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, in relation to the sustainability issue, what we need to do is to minimise the carbon footprint of this development. So therefore, we need to optimise the amount of renewable energy generation on the site. And if we can negotiate a scheme that does not use fossil fuel heating, i.e. gas boilers, we can actually use electric systems, it would be far, far better. In terms of the drainage issue, we know because of the underlying geology that it's problematic, and I suggest that if we to get the SUDS right, it will influence the layout. And that's why I raised it at this point. Because of the lie of the land there, it will be part of the parameter planning looking at the sustainable urban drainage scheme.
Okay, I understand. We're not going to go for the details, but that's the important thing. Councillor Reeve, very briefly on that.
Yeah, just briefly, just to add, when we do, if we are going to look at doing an extra assessment on the viability of Spot Lane being used, I'd like it noted that they need to actually look at it during peak times, not at midday during half term. It needs to be school run times.
I understand that. I hope you understand why I'm looking at the local road network, given what I said, Councillor Perry, earlier. I've got to go to Steve Mumford, then I'll come back.
It seemed like last year that I put my hand up to speak, and since then you've covered so many points, a lot of them irrelevant, some relevant, and the points I was going to raise have been adequately summarised by the planning officer. I'm concerned about Church Road. He's saying that there is opportunity to widen it. Where there's not opportunity to widen it, I'd consider parking places which wouldn't have such an impact on the ancient hedgerow as taking the whole thing out. That's something we could look at. But I'm glad if I'm supporting the deferral and all that has been summarised by the officer.
Councillor Perry.
No, I'll be very brief. I just want to make sure I understood all the process. So we're going to, the idea is to defer. You're going to look at all these particular points that you've highlighted, which is fair enough. And then when it'll come back to us as a report, I presume, and then we have the right to approve or refuse at that point in time. Is that
Absolutely, Councillor, and it will be, and obviously that will be based on the local factors, where we, you know, where you may have some purchase.
Okay.
Councillor Wilby. Right, thank you. And you did actually come back, Councillor Harwood, so I'm assuming that what you wanted to say you've now covered or not?
Yes, I think it's covered. So essentially, my motion, where what I've now said is that instead of an approval for the outline and the means of access, it's a deferral to bottom out all of the issues that have been raised by members before we vote on the outline. And like you, Chairman, I just want to put down a point that I would have much preferred a detailed application where we could have had this conversation in a much more satisfactory way. But the waters have been muddied by the move to an outline only.
Right, the only thing to bottom out is in terms of this deferral process, whether, because the officer is going to be talking to the applicant, how we maximise, shall we say, local stakeholder consultation on this process. And when we've had deferrals in the past, we have involved a local ward member, parish councils and principal members of this committee. I don't see why we can't. And frankly, given that this is going to have to come back to the committee and there are views of this committee, I think we do need to have some members of this committee in that process with officers, otherwise we just go through this whole, there's a risk of going through this again. So, so that will be, Councillor, that will, yeah, so that's deferral in consultation with Councillor Newton, the two parish councils, the chairman, the Conservative, Liberal Democrat, Labour and Independent spokespersons. Is that agreed? That those are the right people? Then, so right, on that basis then I will put the motion for deferral to the vote. All those members in, sorry? I did. To the vote. Those in favour? That's 9. Those against? Abstentions? Right. Now, it's very early, but I think that given the length of this item, that we will now take our coffee break at this point. It's been 15 minutes and the coffee is downstairs.
To consider removal of the car park, provision of additional open space and landscaping around the church.
Yours will be plain sailing. Yours will be plain sailing.
Around the church. Provision of additional open space adjacent to consideration.
I'm starting to make my excuses already. I did speak to Matt. I did say we haven't. I said to Matt, what's happening? I'm not saying it's but I thought it was far too early to talk about the powers that be and the pressure. I've said to Matt, I know it hasn't got as many issues, but I'm not rushing out, in my opinion, whether the powers that be have another chat. I think, I've said to him, we haven't got Kent Highways coming. Let's see. So I've put it out there. I know that's not going to go down well, but
Potential for
it won't.
Early next year.
No, just in the south, I think. Yeah. Yeah, it's scrubland up round by the church.
Oh, right. Cheers, Richard. Well done.
No.
I don't.
You try and help the trouble is you try and help
Yes.
you try and help him.
I don't know. I haven't looked at the dates to be
No, I
honest.
know. You try and help him, but you won't get your other words in edgeways, and he takes it all like you're criticising him, but you're not.
You know, not really on that. I suppose in a way it was just saying go away and have a look at the seats. There's nothing wrong with that. Is there? And actually, with them being involved, you know, they can hear it from the horse's mouth, from the applicant, the agent, say, sorry, that doesn't work, or whatever.
Actually, Christine, that expired on the 22nd.
What
According to
expired?
what
Oh,
they
well.
said to me.
It's not my stats.
Expired on the 22nd?
Houses tomorrow.
I would have hoped the officer would have got an extension by now, but if they haven't.
See you later, Richard. Thank you.
It's the front of mine. It's
Great.
enjoy. Cheers. I think we're not going to finish.
I'll be fine. It's going to take longer to get through the speakers than it is to actually debate these ones. They're all nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing to it.
Problem. Shit officer recommendations and incorrect assessments. They've, for example, on this next one.
What, Chegworth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They rely on policy SP21, which relates to existing economic development premises. This is a field. They relate to...
What, the officer's report?
Mm.
Who wrote it?
Ironically, Tony Ryan. And several other policies, which, well, the three principal policies they refer to I don't think are relevant.
Shattered. All the better for being here, yes, indeed, and living the dream that is the planning committee, but it's slightly more of a... What's the right word? Be careful, choose my words carefully. Let's just say I prefer doing Maidstone Planning Committee to Swale Planning Committee. Yeah, I know, it can be difficult. No, I know, it does, yeah, it gets frustrating. Yeah.
Have you heard from our friends at Springfield? Yeah.
I'm
They've
even
gone
hearing
very
it from
quiet.
I've got builders in at the minute doing a garage conversion for me, and one of them lives in bloody Ringleston, and he's going, are they going to refuse that bloody town block scheme? I'm just sitting there going, just don't even talk to me about it.
That's unusual. Guy here, for local democracy reporter, working with the KM, actually did an interview just now on his phone, which was quite nice. It's nice that they sent someone for a change.
Yeah, we've had all the materials in for that.
That's
They've
excellent.
fortunately forgotten to...
Dennis got me a coffee, which was nice.
Well, this is the snake, as I call it.
Well,
even though
I don't want any more. I've had so much coffee.
They try to
today.
dumb
I can
down
never
all
drink
the-
enough coffee. Actually, I drank mostly tea today.
They've come back with a decent palate.
Oh, great.
It's polishing it.
A long weekend.
Are you all right, Lottie? You look. It's quite warm in here, and yet you seem to be shivering.
I wonder if there a draft. That's not good.
You know what? You know what causes that? Alcohol deprivation.
Oh, I couldn't possibly comment.
Because neither you nor me nor Councillor Spooner have been in that position for years. No, I'm only joking.
Minutes? No.
Yeah, I'm only
At
joking.
the same time, with a thing up in
That can do it. That can do it. I'm never low enough in caffeine to find out what caffeine withdrawal is like, because I sleep extremely well. It has no effect on me in that sense. A lot of people can't sleep when they're caffeinated. It doesn't affect me in that sense. I must drink about 20 cups of coffee a day, and about the same amount of tea. So.
Honestly, I don't touch tea.
Well, it depends on the type of tea, but anyway.
I don't like tea.
Oh, I can't. Well, it's very easy to make bad tea,
I
certainly.
apparently make very good tea, but I don't drink it.
Yeah, I make good tea, but it's odd really, because I don't do anything different to my sister, as far as I can see. Yet her tea is terrible, and mine's fine. And that's not just mine.
It's all in the stirring.
It's not funny. It's very odd, really. I don't see I'm doing anything different.
Well, if it harks back to that, you'll have to hark back to the fact that the affordable housing isn't required, because that's being delivered elsewhere.
I think that the fundamental question with this scheme is who we're going to name it after.
Which scheme?
This one we were just discussing. I think, as he's retired, that it should be named after the former leader of KCC to memorialise his departure.
That's the countryside lands.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's always been known as Carterland informally.
Oh. Doesn't mean you can't have more. I mean, how many places in Maidstone are called Buckland?
They've now appointed their professional team.
The one we always used to joke about was the one up The former college site.
With us to...
Rowland Close, it's called.
We've told them it's going to be an SPD.
A road called Rowland Close. At one time we had a planning officer called Rowland Close, and everyone said, "You named a road after yourself, Rowland." He didn't, because he had a W in his name, and this didn't. But everyone was taking the piss for years. How do you get away with naming a road after yourself, Rowland?
They're fundamental.
I think that's right. Sorry? Where's that, Tony?
Barracks.
Yeah, it's all good fun, mate. I think they want you to sign something if you haven't signed it already. Mike Nash is leaving, sadly.
I know. This keeps happening, doesn't it? We get the good officers and then they all go.
And the crap ones stay. That's not aimed at you. You're a very good officer.
Well, technically I did go because I worked for Swain.
Yeah, see? Well, yeah, you go. That proves the point, doesn't it? That proves the point. So there you go. Really? Your sandwiches are that lethal that they set alarms on? Yes, I know. I had to ring you once when we couldn't find the blooming key to lock Jubilee Square. Yeah.
Do I need to get this ready?
What's that?
The next item.
Oh, are we doing that next? Oh, yeah.
Hopefully we can get through it quick.
Is that reason for refusing?
Well, potentially. Yeah, well, it's always nice to have one. Do you have any?
Well, I gave it some thought as I suspected it might be at risk.
I have to say, I'm not sure there are many grounds, but I think given the experience of a much bigger caravan site in Harwich, and we all got a bit leery of these, haven't we? I can't say I blame them in some ways, but the fact is that regardless of what condition we put on it, some people are going to try and live there all year round. Yeah. And provided they've got another address somewhere, you know, even if it's on a bank statement 20 years old, they haven't changed, and the bank's still, you know, because you get your bank statements online these days, so they don't have to send it to you. So people that have that address from 20 years ago, give it to the site. As far as they're concerned, they're not going to check, it's valid. And so they can live. And to be honest, I'm not really sure what harm it as long as it appears kosher. To be honest, I'm not really sure what harm it does, except with the exploitative situation we have with, that's different. I mean, because he was taking people for mugs, but in the normal run of events, because I own a caravan, which I don't live in all year round, but I do have one down at Dimchurch, and there are people there who, frankly, they do have another address, but they're there 11 months of the year, and then on the month closure period, because it does have a closure period, they go on their annual holiday. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, Canterbury have got a big one at Recolford, and that's the same. They all just clear out.
And does it really cause any problems?
No.
I mean, this Pilgrim's Retreat has caused problems, but that's because the man's a criminal.
Yes. And is trying to effectively make every purchaser that wants to sell on equally culpable. So.
I know. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen and councillors, if we could be bringing ourselves to orders. Can't tell some people. It's everyone who's coming back here, looks like it. Right. We move on to the ever-exciting parish and ward of Harwich and Lenham, where there's something always happening. Item 13, page 11. Riverwood, Chegworth Lane.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is a planning application for 6 lodges to be used for the purposes of tourist accommodation. It's a rather faint plan, but the application site itself is this long, narrow triangle. The applicant identifies that they also own a larger area of land. On this map, you can see a larger strip of woodland extending beyond the application site, which is here. There may be disputes about the detailed ownership boundaries within that area, but those don't affect the application site. The application boundary has been amended to correct areas of Highways England land and to also serve notice on the appropriate parties. So the star sits in the middle of the proposed application site area. You can see the M20 and the railway and beyond the A20 to the north. To the immediate south, the wooded area and the River Len within it are a designated local wildlife area, and it forms part of a longer linear chain. To the west of the site, you can see a group of existing buildings, and this property here is listed. So those are the main designations that surround the site. The proposal is for 6 units to provide holiday accommodation, together with enhanced planting on the boundaries and further planting along the boundary with the Highways England land. The cabins themselves are typical wooden units, 1 bedroom with a small external seating area. This is the view effectively from the, if you know the location, there's a footpath under the roadway. This is towards that point, looking back towards Chegworth Road along the lane itself. This is the view looking into the site entrance. So the M20 is on your left. The neighbouring properties, you can just see the tyre tracks going into the closest property there. This is a view looking from west to east towards the narrow point of the site. The units would be clustered in the western part of the site, so that would be the foreground of the picture. You can see the boundary with the Highways England land to the left and the nature designation and the River Len to the right. As part of the Highways England objection, they requested that, let me go back, that boundary be reinforced so that there is no risk that visitors to the site would trespass onto effectively the motorway verge. This is the fencing type that they have insisted upon, and the applicant has agreed to provide that. It does look rather, this isn't a picture of the site or a picture of how it would look, it's simply the fencing type. But as one of the conditions on the planning application, we would seek to secure an enhanced landscaping scheme so that what looks like a utilitarian industrial fence will be absorbed into that boundary landscaping to the left of the picture. Again, looking at the site plan, the principal considerations are that the local plan encourages rural tourism and included within that holiday accommodation. The tests principally are whether there are significant visual impacts, whether the proposals would adversely affect the character and appearance of the countryside, whether there are ecological impacts, and also any other considerations such as heritage impacts. We are comfortable that the site is sufficiently separated from the listed building to avoid any impact on the setting of that property. There have been a number of concerns raised regarding the potential interaction between users of the site, the woodland to the south, and also the potential impact of surface and foul water drainage into the river, which then moves on to a nearby lake. There is a condition that seeks approval of surface water drainage. The applicant has agreed a system for foul sewerage, a Clargester biotech system, which is one of the slightly more advanced versions. We would suggest adding an additional condition requiring the full details of that system to be submitted prior to the first occupation, in order that we can ensure that it is adequate in its capacity, that there's an appropriate maintenance regime in place, so that we don't have any future risk of inappropriate leakage towards the nature conservation area. KCC Ecology raised some concerns regarding the adequacy of the ecological assessment, but I think looking at this, the site itself has no particular significance in that sense. The key issue is the interface with the nature designation to the south, which is the right on the picture. We've recommended a condition requiring a woodland management plan that particularly focuses on that boundary in terms of providing measures to protect the ecological significance behind. In summary, officers consider that the scheme is low in scale, that the impacts in terms of visual impact on the wider area don't justify refusal, and that potential impacts on adjacent ecology can be managed. Some objections have suggested that this is a way of getting other types of accommodation onto the site, such as G&T. We have to consider the application before us. We've proposed a number of conditions that will control tourist occupation on the site, including providing details of bucking of the units and longer-term management. So on that basis, we're comfortable that the permission that is sought would not necessarily act as a precedent for something less favourable. And on that basis, officers recommend approval subject to the additional condition requiring details of the foul drainage system and the management measures to be approved prior to occupation. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I take declarations of lobbying? That's everyone then. Thank you. Right. Right. Councillor Powell.
This application is for a site that lies between the busy M20 motorway and 17 acres of local wildlife site woodland, also in the applicant's ownership. The woodland surrounds the River Len at Chegworth, Harrietsham, which flows into the moat and Great Water at Leeds Castle. This is an area recommended for a conserve and restore approach and is an environmentally sensitive rural location within the Len Valley landscape of local value, originally part of the Leeds Castle estate and parklands. The site lies outside the village envelope of Harrietsham, with the adjacent woods bordering farmland to the south. The close proximity of the M20 motorway immediately to the north makes this site a totally unsustainable location for a tourist lodge development, almost built on the hard shoulder of the M20. There are significant grounds to refuse planning permission in relation to noise disturbance and poor air quality alone. However, these have all been totally overlooked by the environmental health team, as their assessment was made from a simple desktop analysis and site visit was never made. No acoustic assessments have been completed either, and the proposed wooden chalets have no soundproofing measures. Both the outside and inside amenity space for the future occupiers would be severely compromised. Photographic evidence shows that the site does not benefit from an acoustic fence in this area either. This fence ends at the access road. The amenity of the closest neighbours at Wentways has been totally overlooked. Both the CPRE and Kent Wildlife Trust have objected on grounds that damage will result to the local wildlife site and River Len, both from recreational pressure and sewage ingress. NBC reasons for recommendation states actively within the site is unlikely to impact on the local wildlife site. However, the agent's statement states within the sale of the land are fishing and shooting rights. This indicates an intent to access the protected local wildlife site. The Environment Agency have only submitted a desktop assessment, no site visit was made or percolation tests completed. All comments indicate the conditions are wet and damp and are totally unsuitable for infiltration. The flow of the River Len has not been assessed either for disposal of treated sewage. The Special Aquatic Report highlights as many as 6 areas of concern, but appears to have been totally overlooked by the planning officer. Finally, this application contravenes sections of the local plan policies DM1, 3, 30, 37, DM38 and SS1, in addition to the MPPF policies 83, 84 and 170. Members, I kindly ask that you refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. That was a comprehensive throw-in of the sink at it. Councillor Dean.
Thank you, councillors. Harwich Parish Council remain concerned over both the ecological impact on the adjacent protected woodland and pollution risk to the River Len. Kent Wildlife Trust has identified this woodland as a site of county importance for biodiversity. It provides a refuge for a diverse range of protected wildlife, including water voles, bats and breeding dormice, and has flora of county interest. In spite of KCC Ecology stating there would be no direct recreational access into this woodland from the site, the agent has indicated otherwise, highlighting the importance of secure cycle parking at each chalet. This in relation to the many access ways through the adjacent woods that link up with public footpaths indicated planned access throughout this entire protected area. In June of this year, this committee placed an additional strict conditions to a sewage treatment plant proposal just a half a mile upstream to protect the sensitive chalk stream waters of the River Len. A specialist aquatic report has assessed the proposed sewage provision for this site and highlighted that it will be highly damaging to the surrounding marshy grounds and the waters of the River Len. Identified by Kent Wildlife Trust in preventing the deterioration of rivers in the setting of the AONB. This contravenes policies DM3 and SS1, section 10 of the local plan and paragraph 170 of the national planning policy. It also contravenes sections 117, 118, 120 and 121 of the NPPF. The site is adjacent to 3 motor transport networks, the A20, the high-speed rail link and the M20 motorway. Poor air quality issues and excessive traffic noise generated 24 hours a day make this site totally unsuitable for any leisure development. Environmental Health have not made a site visit and consequently have overlooked these networks and their associated issues. No acoustic assessment has been made and the chalets do not have any soundproofing measures. This fails the requirement of the local policy DM1, relevant to the loss of amenity for the nearest residents at Wettonways, whose property is totally surrounded by the applicant's resident and application site. A previous holiday let application was proposed in 2017 along the A20 at Hole Mill Lane in the same local area. Permission was refused and upheld at appeal due to excessive traffic noise affecting the amenity use of space for the occupants. More severe conditions exist here, as the M20 is only 20 metres from the proposed holiday chalets. Our opinion is that this site is totally unsuitable for any leisure development and request that the committee refuse permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Precisely to the second. And I don't see any local members. Councillor will be indicated, however.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, the whole site's a bit concerning, to be honest. And when we've looked at these before, we have asked for a business plan or a viability from the applicant as such. I'll be honest, I may have missed it online. I've been working away from home at the moment. So I just want my first question to the officer, has that been produced? Because I'm not being funny. If I was coming to stay in Maidstone, 6 lodges next to the M20 would not be my ideal destination.
To answer the question, Chair, there is no detailed business plan with the application. As Councillor Powell indicated, there have been references to potential links with particular recreational activities, but the proposal isn't formally linked to that, so in theory it could be let to any party.
Let's look at so basically what we're saying that one of our policies is about making sure a site is viable and sustainable. We've got no actual proof that this site is sustainable as the holiday lodges, have we, at the moment?
Viability isn't a test as such in terms of the accommodation. It may raise issues in terms of the ability of the site owners to continue to manage the site adequately and to ensure that the mitigation that's put in place is maintained over the long term. It's quite often, it's more about the sincerity of the type of use, the fact that it's genuinely aimed at short-stay holiday lets rather than parties who might purchase a lodge and spend a considerable time of the year there.
I have to say, personally, I would be a little sceptical of the proposed likelihood of the use. It's a small site. Maybe I'm just suspicious and cynical. Well, that's all right. I am suspicious and cynical in general. But I would say that there is quite a possibility that either the recreational use that's been sort of hanging around in the background intensifies considerably in order to lure customers in to what is on the surface a small, unattractive location, or actually it does become de facto a residential use. There is national policy, of course, that supports touring caravan sites, but I have to say that on the positive side, this is such a small site that the contribution to the economy is fairly marginal. So the benefit is not huge, and there do seem to me to be quite a lot of questions. Obviously, we haven't got an acoustic report, so we don't know how bad the noise impact or the other environmental impacts may be. We aren't entirely certain of the ecological impact or the impact on the watercourse, but it seems a little sort of, well, a lot we don't know. I would have thought that, you know, if we were going to approve this application, you know, I would have thought that some evidence on some of these issues should have been presented, and having not been presented, there's just too many things to go away and ask them to you know, for information. I think it wouldn't be the first time we've refused applications because they haven't submitted the relevant reports.
Chair, just to respond to one point as well that Councillor Powell raised regarding the landscape designation. The site lies within an area of the wider setting of Leeds Castle. I believe the land was previously owned by Leeds Castle. That policy does, as the councillor stated, have a preserve and enhance approach. So therefore members can consider whether the potential benefits of the proposal in tourism terms outweigh the harm that would occur to that landscape designation. So that is a test you can exercise in terms of whether there is harm to the landscape. If you consider there is harm, is that harm outweighed by the benefits of the scheme?
My comment that it was a fairly small scheme and its economic benefit was fairly marginal. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if it's a rhetorical question, but the answer is yes. I think these pictures are actually quite misleading from the aerials. When you're actually there on site and you're standing on the south bank of the River Len and you're looking up, it's a relatively narrow strip of trees, particularly when you're looking through, you're not looking through the canopy as we are here. And I suggest that the landscape impact, not so much of the lodges themselves, so that brings a form of very transitory development in, but when you look at what the Highways England are demanding, with that kind of security type fence being built along the site boundary, and you take into account the issue around the foul sewage disposal unit that goes in there, and the fact that the River Len, under the Water Framework Directive, is classed as bad. I think the last Environment Agency strategy so that the fish populations continue to decline, the diatom populations that feed the fish continue to decline, hence the reason why so much investment has had to take place in the Harwich wastewater treatment works, amongst other things. I think a lot of the problem is runoff from the M20, but we'll gloss over that. But coming on to the other issue, we have an air quality management area declared along in a ribbon along the edge of the M20, and this looked very, very close to that AQMA boundary to me. From the noise perspective, in my ward, just a little bit further to the west, we fairly recently won an appeal on Duff Hill works site against residential, and that was bricks and mortar residential on the noise impact. That the appeal inspector felt that the amenity of future residents was not be of a quality that he was prepared to support. However, I think the grounds for refusal here is the landscape impact, because this is an LLV, it's a local landscape of value site in the River Len. I further suggest that there is an issue here around collateral impact upon the woodland in terms of disturbance and the proximity of development, in terms of lighting and all of the other issues that come with it, which will undermine the area of the Kent Wildlife Site adjacent. So I suggest on landscape impact, particularly from the fencing as well as the lodges, but also all of the accoutrements that go with a holiday let, the vehicles coming in, the people coming in, the noise, the barbecues, everything that goes with it. And the lack of information that we have on air quality and acoustics, I think that is grounds enough to say that in a fairly balanced application that the benefit of so few holiday lets outweighs it. And like you, I am concerned a little bit about what is really behind this, because frankly, I know that holiday lets, even in much leafier areas, it's still not that simple to get to stack up economically and to get the footfall and the people to stay. I can't see it here. I suggest that we as a planning authority should refuse, and I'm prepared to move that we so do that.
Councillor Wilby, you were fractionally first. Do you wish to speak to that? Right. I think we're clearly going in a direction, but Councillor Perry, I will take you if you wish to speak.
No, I totally agree with Councillor Harwood, so I would support his proposal. Thank you.
And Councillor Mumford, if you wish to.
No, you've progressed beyond what I was going to say, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's an encouraging degree of consensus. All those in favour, do you want to go over the grounds so that our legal officer is 100% sure? And the committee clerk.
Chair, my notes...
I'm sorry, I'll take Austin first, as he may have light to throw on this.
My notes, Chair, say that the reason for refusal would be on the basis that the proposal, by virtue of their incongruous nature, I think would be a word I'd put into your mouth to describe what you said, would harm the character and appearance of the countryside as identified in the Maidstone Landscape Character Assessment, which is the document that Councillor Powell referred to, and in itself would then be contrary to policies SP17 and DM30, which are the two policies with the particular tests. I don't think we could suggest a reason for refusal based on its unsustainable location, which I think,
I don't think we did, no.
a comment was made. You also suggest that it would provide poor quality accommodation by virtue of noise and air quality. And amenity.
Well, it would be, but it's the amenity impact. Yes. Or at least I haven't demonstrated the opposite, because there are no reports to that effect. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, if I may, I think we do need to specifically specify that it is the site lies within the Len Valley landscape of local value, because I think that feeds in to the landscape character assessment and where we're looking actually to fix the landscape rather than... And I think we also need to build into the reason for refusal not just the impact of the development in terms of the lodges, but also the security fencing along the highway and the domestic paraphernalia that will go with it, such as the lighting, the vehicles and so on. Because if they were just wooden huts in a field, it would be neither here nor there. It's what will go on in and around them will have a significant impact.
Both on the landscape and disturbance to the nature area. Have we got all of that? Yes, that was proposed by Councillor Harwood and seconded by Councillor Wilby. Right.
Sorry, could I check, was there a third reason relating to the impact on the adjacent wildlife site?
Yes, that was in terms of both noise and disturbance and, of course, the external lighting. Councillor Harwood.
I think it's also worth to add that the degree of security fencing will make an impermeable layer. Currently, for example, there are rabbit burrows in that embankment, and there are they will not get back through the site, so therefore there's a permeability issue around the security fencing as well.
Yeah, the trouble is, Councillor Harwood, that could be specifically designed out very easily, so I wouldn't really want to include that unless you really insist. It's quite easy to deal with that.
If I may, I think the issue is less that they couldn't squeeze under the fence. I think it's the fact that you've got development in the field, so therefore you've got the area of local landscape, the county wildlife site. Then you've got the embankment with the semi-natural woodland on it, and they are fragmented. That was
okay. So it's the development itself, not the severing by the fence. Okay, that's a lot clearer, and I think that would stack up. Thank you very much for the clarification, Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't wish to add any further objections, but as a general principle, paragraph 2.03, we seem to be happy that it's timber frame with timber weatherboard felt roof. Well, we know that is completely flammable, and I wonder if we should be encouraging future developers not to use timber frame and timber cladding, but to use rather more robust materials.
Yeah, well, I see where you're coming from. That, I mean, if we were going to approve this application, we might take that further, but we'll note that for further comments in further applications. Thank you. Right, is everyone clear? In that case, I shall put that motion that's been proposed and seconded for refusal on the grounds set out to the vote. Those in favour? And are you voting? Yes, that's unanimous then. Thank you very much. So no further votes required. Right. We move on to item 15, page 56, land to the south of the Gables, Marden Road, in the equally busy parish of Staplehurst.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application for a replacement storage barn building. The application site lies to the south of Marden Road, to the west of the main built-up area, and is in the countryside. The application site comprises, let me zoom in a little bit, effectively a paddock that is attached to a wider land holding to the south. The site is accessed along a narrow access strip adjacent to a residential property called the Gables. Looking at the Google plan, let me get the pointer. This part of the map shows the application site. This is the gables, the residential property and other adjacent residential properties. Immediately to the east is a commercial yard, which I believe it is a crane storage maintenance yard. To the west, agricultural land. The proposal seeks to replace this existing structure with a building of a larger footprint and a slightly increased height. But importantly, the front building line and the external boundaries of the building remain unchanged. It extends towards the boundary, so wouldn't have a visual impact. At the front, the building would be around 0.2 metres taller, so not a significant increase. And whilst it would be about a metre higher at the back, that wouldn't be visible from third-party land. So you can see there the proposal would effectively replace the building, extend further back and be slightly higher at the rear. This is the view from the application site onto the additional land that is owned by the applicant. These buildings, very small scale drawing I'm afraid, but it shows the existing building on the bottom, the proposed building on the top. You can see on this drawing that is the net change in the footprint of the building. So in context of the site as a whole, we don't consider that to be significant. The site has a significant planning history in terms of proposals for residential and other developments which have been unsuccessful. We have to view the application as submitted, and the applicant states that the replacement barn will provide secure storage for equipment required to maintain the land. A number of objections or comments state that the land is not in agricultural use, and to some extent that would remove one particular policy support for the scheme, but nevertheless it is land that would require maintenance, whether it's agricultural or not, and therefore we have to consider the building on its merit. There is a significant building there already. Replacing a dilapidated building with a modern steel structure we consider will not have an adverse impact upon the character of the area, and we therefore recommend that the permission be approved.
Thank you very much. Can I see any declarations of lobbying, please? I think you've been lobbied by the parish council, at least, surely. Right, thank you. Right. Turning now to the speakers. Mr. Beverti, objector, please. Is that on? I don't think it is. Try again. It's on now, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we object to this application for the following reason. First, this is not a request to erect a replacement barn in place of the existing dilapidated structure, which is open and on earth floor, but rather a new build of a closed structure which is wider, taller, and on elevated concrete flooring. No reason is given for the increase in size. Secondly, the rationale given for this new building is for secure storage of agricultural equipment. However, this site already has a large closed storage unit, which is heavily padlocked and alarmed. This structure more than adequately provides secure containment of equipment such as listed in this application. Moreover, there is no agricultural activity of any sort at this site, and there has never been for at least 25 years. The existing open barn has never been used to store any equipment for agricultural or gardening purposes. The only activity has been cutting the grass of the field 2-3 times a year using a sit-on mower which is stored in the existing lock-up unit. Hence, we challenge the justification or need for an additional new storage building. Thirdly, the request for the building of a new storage unit has been part of all the previous applications to develop this site. It was refused in all cases by Maidstone Borough Council and the planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State during appeal. They found no justification for an additional closed storage unit. We believe that this still holds true for this latest application. In summary, Mr. Chairman, we believe that this application is not for the replacement of an existing structure, but instead a new build, closed structure with a larger volume and footprint, for which no justification is provided and no need demonstrated. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Buller, Staples Parish Council.
Good evening, Chairman, councillors, officers.
Good evening and welcome again.
Actually, Chairman. The Parish Council recommends refusal of this application for a replacement barn because there is no evidence of any agricultural need for this proposed enlarged new building. This application was first submitted in July 2019 and opposed by the Parish Council. The application was then withdrawn, it was resubmitted in September with minor alterations, and the applicant had not answered any of the concerns of the Parish Council or the nearest neighbour. This site has a very complicated planning history with many refusals, including one on appeal, which included a replacement storage building. There is no evidence of any agricultural use on this site, only grass cutting. Policy DM36 of the Maidstone Borough Local Plan clearly states that proposals for new agricultural buildings must meet the following criteria. 1. The proposal is necessary for the purpose of agriculture. It fails on this count. The structure will be located within or adjacent to an existing group of buildings. This is not the case here. DM30 echoes this policy. A different storage building on this site was given permission in 2015 under permitted development to be changed into a dwelling. This permission then lapsed. The applicant reapplied in June 2019, but then the application was withdrawn in July. This barn is therefore available as secure storage space, and we understand it's being used for this purpose. So why is another secure barn needed? If you approve this application, we all know how easy it can be to get permitted development to change an agricultural building into a dwelling. Please refuse this application as there is no evidence of agricultural use of the land to justify the need for this replacement barn. It's against policies DM36 and DM30 of your Maidstone local plan. The Parish Council also considered the application is contrary to SP17 and our neighbourhood plan policy PW2 because of concerns of harm and appearance to the countryside. I see no reasons to set aside these policies. There is a barn available on site to secure any grass-cutting machinery. I look forward to you taking the Parish Council views into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buller. Mr Garrod, the applicant, please.
Mr Chairman and Council members, I must apologise that this has been called to committee, as there are no real requirements or reasons this to have occurred. This is a brownfield site next to a crane yard, so the impact on the countryside is negligible, and the nearest property is 70 metres away. This site cannot be seen from the road. The crane yard is lit all night with security lights due to vandalism. The site has suffered several break-ins, and I cannot keep any equipment in the open buildings as I've had my tractor and trailer stolen. The new building is only 6 feet deeper. No extra traffic will be generated as I keep equipment there instead of bringing it home, and I keep the field mowed. It is not possible to convert the existing barn into a secure, usable building. The design of the building is in keeping to blend in, and current trees and shrubs will screen it. The change in height and depth is needed for current equipment needs. The new barn will be an improvement to the current dilapidated, unusable pole barn that is an eyesore, and subject to approval, I can carry out agricultural or a business in keeping with the planning permission that was granted many years ago. There is a personal vendetta against me by the owners of the Gables, who have always wanted to purchase this land. I bought the field to prevent the gypsies buying it, because I had agreed to buy the Gables, until the current owners pulled out of the sale, leaving me with a field. I have vastly improved the land over the years, clearing acres of brambles and dead trees. They have been intent on blocking everything I do. This is on record. Several years ago, Councillor Perry, as chairman, picked up the application for 4 houses, which was for approval, and declared before any discussion that he wanted it refused. The chairman should remain impartial. I made an official complaint, and since then, Councillor Perry has led a mission to prevent any development on this...
Mr. Garrett, please. This is a planning
well, I have to just finish this bit because of the time.
I'm sorry, Mr. Garrett, if you're going to attack the integrity of members of this committee, you are not continuing. Stick to the planning issue.
Okay, that's fine. Obviously, the call to committee has no grounds. The parish council objections are the same as for building houses, and policies PW2, SP5 and SP17 are irrelevant. I would thank you for your time and hope you come to a correct decision and improve this application. To do any agricultural needs on this plot, I need a building that is usable and secure. The building I have is already full of a motorhome and equipment, so I need this building so that I can carry out agricultural, such as building or planting trees on this site. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, given that there's been a lot of discussion about the policy background, that it is appropriate at this point to ask the officer to clarify the policy position insofar as we can.
Thank you, Chair. These are in the officer's written report, but I didn't deal with them in the verbal presentation. But policy DM30 controls design principles in the countryside. In particular, criterion 4 states that where built development is proposed, there would be no existing building or structure capable of conversion or reuse to provide the required facilities. The parish have pointed out that there is an existing building on the site. The applicant hasn't provided a detailed assessment of how the buildings are used on the site, but we also have to consider the net harm, because there is an existing structure here. In theory, I'm sure it could be converted at expense and made secure. As members will be aware, the security of farming and other equipment in the countryside is a significant issue, and theft is high, and the perception or impact of crime can be a material consideration. So you would have to give weight to that element. The second policy that was referred to was policy DM36. DM36 relates specifically to agricultural or other trade or business uses. And it, as the parish council stated, the building must be necessary for the purposes of agriculture, and that there isn't an alternative building available to provide that need. Now, what we don't have as part of the application is a detailed breakdown of the facilities on the site in terms of storage, the equipment required to maintain the site, but we have to also take account of the fact that this replaces an existing structure. So the net harm to the character of the countryside is relatively modest. This is not an entirely new building on the plot. It's effectively a modern building to replace a structure that appears to be approaching redundancy if it's not there already. So we have to give weight to the fact that that existing structure is there and that we're not necessarily introducing a whole new building into open countryside. So we don't have evidence of the specific needs and requirements of the site, but you could say that the lack of secure storage constrains the site from being used productively. And we also have to afford weight to the fact that that building is there already.
My only unease about that, because I hear what you're saying, is that with the lack of such knowledge, and I know one has to consider the planning application in front of us, but I would hate to effectively authorise a building, replacement or otherwise, if it was immediately going to become redundant and effectively be converted quite rapidly once a replacement building's there, not that long afterwards, into a dwelling, because the agricultural or other use has rapidly ceased to, be viable, and effectively may never have been viable, but we don't know, if you see what I mean. So I think that's at the root of the parish council and other members' concern. So I may come back to that later, because I do take on board on the opposite side of the issue that it is a relatively modest enhancement, so these issues have to be weighed up. And at that point, I will turn to Councillor Perry as the local member.
Thank you, Chairman. I will ignore the comments made by the applicant. I'll ignore the comments made by the applicant, the personal comments. Let me just look at this. I did struggle with this, I have to admit, because there is a long history here. We know that. I won't go over it, but there is a very long history. We've had appeals and various other things. But I do question, and here I do understand where the parish council's coming from, because I couldn't understand what the need was, because there is secure building on the site. It didn't seem to be a straight replacement. It seemed to be... Sorry, I'll come... No, that's all right if you want to. No, it's all right, Clive, don't worry. No, why there doesn't seem to be this argument that it's a replacement, but it seems more like a new build to me. It doesn't seem to be. And I think we're lacking in information of why this is needed, because this has never been agricultural land. It's never been farmed. It's just been cut. The grass has just been cut a few times a year. And it does seem to be all a bit strange and a bit over the top why suddenly we need this new building is needed. There's no evidence for it, nothing supplied. And that seems to be something does really, really concern me. So I couldn't see what the justification was for this, given the planning history on this site of any form of development that's been rejected, particularly because it's outside the village envelope and because of its effect on the environment and the scene, the countryside scene. So I struggle with this. I really do. And I can't see evidence for the need for it at all. And what worries me, you put something on this site that was essentially a new build, and you're creating a precedent, which I think was what Councillor Buller was alluding to, that will be an issue in the future. And I think we could be making a real rob for our own back. So on that basis, I'd either want to see it at the very least deferred, because I think we need more information. So I'm a little bit in the dark on this, but on practice, I think it should be refused, as all other developments on this site have been. Thank you.
We'll come back to what we can and can't do in a minute. I'll take Councillor Eve.
Thank you, Chairman. I think taking a balanced view on this application, if you look at the picture there, there is no real use for it. I think we've got to consider the fact that actually replacing what's there might actually be a viable option. The impact going back 6 feet might be a little bit inappropriate, but it's not a massive increase on plot size. And securing equipment is obviously a high priority, which has been mentioned, especially with rural theft being a priority. Yeah. That's a positive, and I want that just pointed out, that the fact that we should at least consider that side of the argument. However, even the applicant couldn't tell us this evening what the agricultural purposes of the activity is going to be. It sounded like a very quick addition at the end, plant some trees. To me, that's not agricultural. That's, gardening. Can I class planting a tree in my back garden agricultural work? I don't think I would do. I mean, it's never been, or it's not been for, as has been pointed out, for quarter of a century. There's been no agricultural work. There's some, workshops or secure areas already on the plot. I'd have a massive issue in approving this, or even deferring it, if I'm being perfectly honest, given the fact that there is a risk that, if you look back at previous applications, there's already been an attempt to actually put domestic residents on there. It's been refused rightly. If we then say, oh, it's just a replacement shed, all of a sudden we open up a can of worms, and it's going to be quickly turned into, oh, look, I can go back to putting some residential properties on there because policy X, Y, and Z say that I can now do it. So I would happily move to refuse this on the basis of a risk of... I know you're going to say what we can and can't do, but...
I don't think we can ever refuse an application on a risk of what might happen. I wish. We need to come back after I've taken the other speakers have indicated to actually establish what we can and can't do in terms of seeking information and further information. Now, Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, we've got to look at what's in front of us, not the history of this site. The history of this site was one of residential. And now we are faced with an agricultural, so which is a change of heart. We're saying that we want it for security. The applicant tonight said that the other barn was full up, but you can't turn it down because you think it's going to go residential. You're asking me to turn down a barn in the countryside. No, that's not on. You can't do that. It complies with the policies. There is the DM policies that have been pointed out that they must establish evidence. So the most I'm going to accept tonight is we defer it until there is evidence produced that there is a need for the building. But not refuse it. You can't refuse it.
Now, Councillor Kimmants.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to see the size of your garden if it's just a back garden, because mine's tiny and I struggle with that. As you know, I speak as I see. I'm a very plain speaker, and to me, that's falling down. It's not fit for purpose. It needs to be rebuilt, really. You couldn't secure anything in there, not even half a dozen chickens, really, could you? So it desperately needs knocking down and rebuilding, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Chairman. It sounds like we're heading potentially towards a deferral to get some background on this. In the past, I've actually quite unfashionably supported some of the redevelopment proposals of this site because a part and parcel of those applications were increased landscaping and actually getting the trees back on the site and so on. I'm a little bit concerned here that we are just, if you like, getting the replacement shed with quite a utilitarian structure projecting out into the low weald. And I suggest if there is a deferral to look at what is the justification and underpinning for the proposal, that a part of that should be that we look at a landscaping scheme, particularly in terms of the views from the east, where we may actually need some planting around it. I mean, it was talked about we might need the shed for some tree planting. Well, I think they need some tree planting to hide the utilitarian structure. The other point is we have policies, and the MPPG has policies in relation to replacement bird and bat nesting. I can't see any studies as to whether there's been a bat survey or whatever within this building. However, I suggest that we should at the very least be attaching some bat boxes or bird boxes to the new replacement structure. We would do that for a real agricultural barn on a farm, so should we do it? We should do it here.
To a motion. A clarification by all means.
No, it's been mentioned about security, but as both, I think Councillor Buller mentioned it and Professor Verberti mentioned it, there is a secure building on there where the equipment has been kept. So I don't think that's an issue in this particular case.
I think, to be honest, we need to concentrate on this application. I'm minded to defer for further information and to take on board the points that Councillor Harwood made. Councillor Mumford. I think this is very finely balanced, could go either way depending on the information submitted in my opinion, but we need that information. Those in favour of deferral? That's everyone. Thank you very much. Right, moving on to item 16 on page 63. Sorry about that. It was up to them to prove they need it.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application for a replacement dwelling. The application site comprises two parts. Point with my cursor. The existing residential property referred to as Loxley House, and the plot of land where the replacement property would go. Before we look at the details, it's probably useful to have regard to what we consider to be the primary policy test, and that is that within the countryside or outside a settlement boundary, replacement dwellings will be acceptable where the mass and volume of the replacement is not more visually harmful than the original dwelling. So looking, this is Loxley House. I believe it's a former village hall that secured lawful use as residential back in 1999. So bearing in mind the policy test that I've just highlighted, that is the existing, that is the proposed replacement.
Sure, that's not one of the Harwich holiday carrot.
So the existing building has a lawful residential use. It forms part of a group of other buildings which have benefited from prior notification to residential. This drawing or this image here shows that this is the existing building and these are the cluster of other buildings that we're advised have consent for residential. If you look at the Google map, you'll see that the wider area contains a significant number of commercial and other operations, so it isn't isolated in the truest sense. So this is the roof of the existing property, and this is the plot where the replacement building would go. Again, zooming out a little bit, members should have regard to the character of a gravelly bottom lane, where buildings are principally set a significant distance back within their plots. And that's a characteristic of both the application site and its wider surroundings. This is the view looking towards the application site. You can't see the existing building, it's behind that shed there. This is the application site in the foreground. This existing driveway would be used to gain access into the site from the driveway rather than the road. This is a plan showing the layout of the proposal. So again, the existing building there, the proposed replacement building here. The applicants seek to mitigate its visual impact with a substantial landscaping screen, but in the view of officers, hiding a building doesn't overcome the harmful impact on the countryside. These are the floor plans of the property. It's a substantial building. I think the kitchen's bigger than my bungalow. It has large, arguably oversized rooms. I should say that there are a number of approved buildings in this area of a similar scale, but each site has its different circumstances and has to meet the policy requirements. In the view of officers, the primary tests are, would the replacement building have no harm on the character and appearance of the area? Again, that substantial building would sit within this plot, albeit that the applicant intends to screen it with landscaping. Would the proposal enhance the local distinctiveness? Again, we've emphasised that the character of this section of Gravelly Bottom Road is very much one of an open rural appearance, and the test that we highlighted before, would the mass and volume be no more visually harmful, and would the proposal be sympathetic to the rural character of the area? I think our view is that proposal fails on all of those counts, and we recommend refusal.
Sorry? Yes, I'm going to do that now. Declarations of lobbying, please. Seems to be everyone apart from Councillor Mumford who's been left off the mailing list. Okay, that's everyone. Pardon me. Right. Right. We now move to the speakers. Mr. Hawkins, I'm sure you know.
Thank you. Was that heard? I was just to say the photographs that are shown are not representative of the current site situation, so just be mindful of that as I do my presentation, because otherwise it looks like I'm making stuff up. Thank you. Yes, good evening, members. As you probably know, this is a site that has long and protracted planning history, so long in fact that I was the case officer for an appeal in 2008 against this particular site. So I do understand why the application has previously been recommended for refusal, and I do see that in terms of being consistent, why this application has been recommended for refusal by officers, so you know that's good. But I think there's a few important matters that members do need to note with this application. As you said, this isn't an application for a new house, but rather a replacement dwelling. So it's not about principle, it's a discussion about visual harm. The applicant has submitted a legal agreement that would see the removal of the existing building, which I think you can all see is not of particularly outstanding architectural merit. I don't think it adds or contributes at all to the character and appearance of the locality. Importantly, circumstances on the site have changed. There is now a substantial landscape screen to the front and to the side, so actually views into and out of the site are almost non-existent as it stands at the moment. And actually the landscaping that's shown on those plans is more representative of what's there. There are additional residential units to the rear of the site which have been granted permitted development rights. And importantly, this application now benefits from local support. The parish council, the ward members, and all local residents who are here this evening support this application. And previously, parish council objected, as did local residents. So, as we can see, the principle is acceptable. The impact is really about visual impact, which is of course subjective. Policy DM32 requires harm to be identified, and it doesn't say that a building can't be larger. It has to identify what that harm is. And in the report, I don't see any identification of harm. It won't be visible from a public highway because of the dense landscaping along the frontage and along the access road. It won't be visible from public rights-of-way KH259, KH309 or KH311, and I've walked all public rights-of-way. It would be seen from the cottage to the west, but they support the proposal. It would be seen from Fairview, but again, they are in favour of this application because they believe it brings betterment to the area. In terms of the pattern and grain of development in the area, as the aerial photograph showed, yes, they are mostly frontage developments. Yes, they are set back from the highway, but actually the setback is very similar to what is being proposed here. If you look at the line along Gravelly Bottom Road and on the wider aerial view, it is fairly consistent with what you see. So to conclude, I understand this is a site which has a history which is material. However, there are significant changes in circumstances which I think members need to consider. Local support on this one, no objections, and I hope, therefore, you're able to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Right, I don't think we've got any local members. Councillor Perry, you did indicate, so we'll go straight to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, I'll be very brief. I read this, and I'm sorry, officers, I seem to be going against your recommendations, but I couldn't see any real reason to refuse it. One of the key things, it seems to me, and I'm sorry, I'll speak more closely to the microphone, is the local representations. There's no objections from local residents, and the parish council recommend approval of it. Now, these are key things, because if you're talking, and I think it was mentioned by the applicant that some of these issues are subjective, and clearly the local residents seem to support this, and that seems to be a very, very strong reason why we shouldn't really object to it. And it does concern me, actually, that when we do get parish council representations, often we don't go along with them. But I think on this one, I really do think we should approve this, and I would recommend approval. Thank you.
I will remind members that I'm not arguing against it, but with an overturn to approve, just as with one to refuse against officer's recommendation, we will require reasons in due course. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. The policy landscape is absolutely clear in relation to this site, and if our justification for developing such large residential units in the open countryside were the presence of a dilapidated building, our Low Weald and our Greensand Ridge would resemble Grove Green within a few years. And I really do think the council officers have got it exactly right. Gravelly Bottom Road has a character, and that character is not chocolate box in some ways, but it is true Kentish countryside. And I suggest that if we do not want to invite many similar applications, we need to uphold our policies, and we therefore need to refuse this application. I don't think the motion proposed by the previous speaker was seconded, so I will therefore like to move that we do refuse this planning application as per the recommendation from officers on the papers. Thank you.
Is that seconded at this time? Councillor Mumford, would you like to speak now?
Totally agree with Councillor Harwood. We got policies, they were hard for those who were involved in the local planning to just steamroll them over because we have other support. Yeah, I don't think we should be.
Councillor Kimmans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sounds like Austin Mack is a bit jealous of the size of the rooms because he lives in a shoebox. I must admit, I'm very, very familiar with Gravelly Bottom Road, obviously being a cab driver for over 30 years, trying to find the nameplates on a lot of the properties along there, especially when it's pitch black and it's raining and there's rocks in the road where the rain's washed them away. I like the idea of the planting at the front and the pushing of the building behind. You won't be able to see it. Well, you can't see the buildings down there anyway. Like I say, you can't even see the nameplates. But and it's the first time for quite a while that I actually agree with Councillor Perry and disagree with Councillor Harwood. But that's how I stand anyway.
I too am extremely familiar with this, probably from the opposite end of the day from you, Councillor Kimmants. Many years ago, when I first joined Royal Mail, I used to traipse around here at stupid o'clock in the morning when we had deliveries at 10 to 7 a.m. It was no easier for a postman trying to find the right house down there, I'll tell you. I have a lot of sympathy for the applicant. However, as is often said, difficult cases make bad law. I think the fact of the matter is that whilst approving this application, if we approve this application, we need a very, very good reason other than it's popular, which is a good start, admittedly, but in and of itself, it's not sufficient. So we need planning policy reasons why this would be an overturn, as I said to Councillor Perry a few minutes ago. I have to say I'm quite struggling with that because the simple fact that it's replacing an existing substandard dwelling, admittedly it is, and a not very attractive one, could be an argument for a property on this site, but it would not necessarily be an argument for a property of this scale. And if we did allow a property of this scale because of the need to replace an existing dwelling and say it's okay because it's got landscaping in front of it, we ran straight into the issue, not of setting a precedent, because technically there's no such thing as a precedent, but we do run into the issue of the fact that every applicant from here to John O'Groats, who wants to build in Maidstone, will be hauling us over the coals for a lack of consistency. And there is an issue in planning of consistency of application of policies, as opposed to precedent, which is not quite the same thing. So rather reluctantly, I find myself in the position of saying that, yes, there could well be an acceptable application on this site, but I am far from convinced that this is the right application to achieve that, because if we need much firmer grounds than it's okay in a location like this to overcome the very high policy bar, and I think we are laying ourselves wide open as a council if we approve it. Anyway, that's my view. Any further members? Councillor Spoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with everything you just said. As you say, there is no such thing as precedent in planning, but what we actually do is we compromise other areas of land, and I think that could well be the case here. I think it flies in the face of DM32, and I think it's a sound case for refusal. I think the officers have got it absolutely on the spot. Thank you.
Any further? No. Are you indicating Councillor Wilby? I'm not sure. Okay. Thank you very much. In that case, I think it's a straight. Well, I will move the motion that's been proposed. And we'll see what happens then. Councillor Harwood has proposed, and it's been seconded, that we've refused the application on the grounds set out. Those in favour of that motion? Those against? Right, any abstentions? One. I don't need to come back to any further consideration of potential grounds at that point then, because we've made a decision. We move on to item 17, page 71.
Thank you, Chair. The final item on today's agenda, a planning application for extension works to an existing barn conversion. The property is located adjacent to the large estate that is farmed by the applicants. The original farmhouse, I believe, is this property here, and some time ago Mole End was converted and the family now live in that property. It's a high quality conversion of an original barn. Permission was granted on the basis that the conversion was highly respectful of the form and character of the barn, and you can see from the photographs that its integrity, shape, form and character remain very well preserved. That's a picture of the building in its curtilage. Here you can see an existing garage block adjacent to the house, and part of the application seeks to extend that building. The garage extension would go out to the right-hand side of the garage. This element has been approved already under a separate planning application, so we raise no objection to that part of the application, and that's the garage building. The extension would go out to the right. This is the existing barn conversion. The proposal, which I've highlighted in yellow, seeks to extend out to the right of the frontage. Single story, hipped roof in character with the existing building. The proposal would provide 2 additional bedrooms and a bathroom. The existing building is very tight, particularly if you think that it functions as a farmhouse for a larger operation. The applicant has stated that they have an extended family that visit rather than necessarily part of the operation. Obviously they can't accommodate that family in the existing building. The proposals are designed with a glazed carport style frontage to reduce the impact of the proposal adjacent to the building. It's a common approach on heritage buildings to provide, say, a glazed link to attach an extension to the building to reduce the impact. This property is not a formally listed building, but is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset. The policy tests for a non-designated asset are slightly different to those for a formal grade 1-2 building. For a formally listed building, there has to be an overriding public benefit to outweigh the harm. On a non-statutory building, you have greater flexibility in weighing up the considerations. Our conservation officer advises that they consider it important that the form of the building as it exists, if we go back to that picture, is retained. So the extension would come out to the right of that picture, set back from the frontage, within the grounds, not particularly visible from principal public areas. So I suppose our conservation officer is taking a slightly purist approach to the building. But they do consider that there is harm. One requirement in the MPPF when considering the harm to either a designated or a non-designated heritage asset is whether there are alternatives that wouldn't cause the same level of harm. The officer's view is that the property has a good curtilage and certainly plenty of open space for parking, that the garage block could easily be converted into a high-quality annex to help the family with additional accommodation, but it wouldn't necessarily be attached to the property. There is another outbuilding on the property of a smaller scale but similar character that might also be suitable for conversion. So our view is that the applicant hasn't fully explored the alternatives available to them. They do have planning permission for effectively a subterranean extension to the property where there would have been a small glazed link coming out of the side of the property, but the members of the family would have gone down effectively a staircase along an underground corridor into accommodation. Their advice is that that wouldn't be appropriate in terms of surface water flood risk, and having dealt with lots of basement extensions in central London, the cost approach is prohibitive. But we have to consider the impact on the heritage asset. So, led by the Conservation Officer, our view is that the proposal causes harm to the undesignated asset and that alternatives haven't been fully considered. But as I highlighted, the flexibility is there for members to consider. The late update reflects a submission by the applicant who has emphasised their role within the community, the importance of the relationship of the property to the farming operation. Those are issues you can give some weight to, but this is a dwelling that could be sold on the open market the day after planning permission is granted. It's not tied to the agricultural holding. There are clearly personal circumstances for the applicant which we believe are genuine, but we believe that limited weight can be afforded to those because it is simply a residential dwelling. On that basis, it's a finely balanced view, but the officers consider that there is an acceptable degree of harm. There is one amendment I would like to make. In paragraph 7.01 and in the reason for refusal, the case officer has used the word destroy. I think it's too heavy-handed to suggest that that extension would destroy the integrity of the building. The original building is clearly intact. It's a question of whether the balance is correct. I would therefore suggest that in the reason for refusal on the top line, the word destroy be replaced with cause significant harm, because I think destruction isn't the correct description of the impact. Thank you.
Did seem a little harsh. As the officer has said, there is an urgent update, which I hope members have perused. If not, please do. Can I take any declarations of lobbying? Will you lobby, Councillor Perry? All right. Remind people that substitute members do need to be lobbied too, and as well, and all members of the committee. Right. Councillor Faulkner, Chart Sutton Parish Council.
Thank you, Chairman. Chart Sutton Parish Council have like to approve this for a few reasons. One of the ones is that I think the officers think that these barns were standalone structures. None of them ever were. These barns were originally for fodder for the winter. On the back of these barns was a yard for cattle, which were fed out of the barn. And these barns all had a lean-to on probably two sides for the winter. And it was a lean-to structure similar to these. I have got one myself on the farm. So we're not altering the character of the building. We're putting it back to as it was 50, 60 years ago. So it's not altering. They're not a standalone structure. And I think this is what's wrong with this application, with this refusal. It won't do any harm. It's putting it back as it was. Sometimes they have two extensions, sometimes they have one. It's genuine, absolutely. It's an organic farmer, all trees, all organic, trying to do a good job and just wants a little bit more room. And I think that to turn it down because you take it as it is now and not as it used to be is the wrong approach. So that's why we at Chart Sutton Parish Council wish to see us approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Faulkner. All right, I have an addition to this because for various reasons Mr Ward was unable to have put his name down earlier, and I am now calling Mr Ward the applicant.
On? Thank you. Could I just clarify, before I say what I have to say, that the other building on the site was converted at the same time that I converted the barn. That's the smaller building on there is also converted as a bedroom, bathroom unit. Okay. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address the committee with regard to my proposed planning application. I would like to respond to the views of the Planning and Conservation Officers as follows. I personally restored this barn from a wreck 26 years ago, so I have detailed knowledge of the history of the site on which it stands. Policy DM32 of the local plan defines the term original dwelling as the form of the dwelling as it was at the 1st of July 1948. I have provided both documentary and photographic evidence that demonstrates that the barn had previously abutted buildings and ancillary buildings in close proximity. It is my view, therefore, that the modest proposal is certainly not out of character with the historic original shape and form of the building, and rather than destroying, I appreciate that word has now been removed, destroying the appearance of the barn, the design enhances and restores the historical setting and is therefore policy compliant. I have in my reply to the planning officer's urgent update shown a clear and demonstrable agricultural need for a presence on site. The organic methods by which I farm require timely responses to real-time alerts. We have controlled atmosphere storage, weather stations, and frost protection apparatus sited around the barn and around the orchards to prevent damage to the crop which cannot be repaired chemically. For this reason, I simply cannot relocate to a larger property to accommodate the needs of an ever-growing family, which to date now includes 6 grandchildren. In summary, the proposal is modest, it cannot be viewed publicly from any position and is barely visible from the adjacent properties. It does not, in my opinion, detract from, obscure or destroy the original historic shape, form or character of the barn and is therefore policy compliant. There is a clear and demonstrable agricultural need to ensure sustainability of the farm and a domestic need to accommodate the growing needs of the family which cannot be met effectively in what is effectively a one-bedroom house. I respect the views of the planning and conservation officers, but strongly feel that their views are somewhat subjective and would kindly request that the committee adopt an objective and flexible view when considering the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. I think you may have been... sorry, Mr. Ward, could you... hang on. Thank you very much. Right. Councillor Mumford, I think your constituent may have been talking to your predecessor, Mr. Ellis, given the word demonstrable coming up. Would you care to give us your views as the local...
Yeah, I normally get straight to the point, but on this one, I defend us from people being cynical so often. And I spoke to you about I had to give advice on procedures, etc., in this room. What happened on one Thursday afternoon is the chairman was phoned up and they'd put in a response to this saying if the officer was minded to refuse, we'd like to see it called in. And then they got onto him and said, we are minded to refuse, therefore what is your reason? Because the Constitution now requires you to give a reason. And I said to him, review it against the policies. If you think it's policy compliant, tell them it's policy compliant. That was my involvement. I looked at the application at that stage, which was Thursday afternoon. There was no conservation officer's report at all. The next day I looked at it, there was a conservation officer's report timed at 10 to 10. So they went to the conservation officer after they had decided to refuse. And that's why I can't take the conservation officer's report seriously. But if we look at it, if it was a listed building, we'd be looking for substantial harm. That would be our grade. And then it's less than substantial harm, and then we would allow it go through. But we would be looking for substantial harm. Can we go back to the plans that show the original building? That's the original building. If you look at the one on the left, you can see the shape and form that they're trying to preserve. And if you see the floor plan, that's nice and square. Now we go to what is being proposed, and you will see that that extension has been pushed right back. If you look in the top left-hand plan, it's been pushed right back to the minimum you could get a corridor in. And if you look to the diagram below that, you can still see the shape and form of the original building, which is the main thrust of the officer's report. If you go to 621, you'll see that the officer says it's a balanced decision. It's subjective. Do you feel that the shape and form of that building has been, as the conservation officer said the next morning after they decided to turn it down, been destroyed? I know we've amended that, but he was in a hurry to write the report. I don't think it has. I think anybody who has got knowledge of that kind of building will go up to it and still see the shape and form of the original building. Those that don't have knowledge will walk up and say that is a sympathetic development of that site. So I'm going to propose that we approve the recommendation. My reason being, we believe that it causes less than substantial harm to the unlisted heritage asset. Thank you, gentlemen. It causes less than substantial harm to the existing unlisted heritage asset, and the shape and form and function of the original building can still be seen.
Sorry, if I could just respond to that first. You don't, on a non-designated heritage asset, you don't have to decide whether there is substantial or less than substantial harm. Those tests relate to formally designated buildings where you have to find a public interest. On this non-allocated asset, or designated asset, you simply have to balance judgments in a clear manner. So you don't have to define a particular level of harm in the tradition.
What the officer's saying, the hurdle to get over is a lot lower for a non-listed heritage asset. And I do not feel that the harm being done to that building is substantial in any way.
If I may sort of partially assist, I think what you have to say is something like, having weighed all the considerations, it is your view that on balance, there is not significant, there is no the minor harm, if such there be, to the building is outweighed by whatever you consider it to be outweighed by. So would you like, it's best to address the other point Councillor Mumford raised about procedure at this point, if you wish to.
Just to be clear on your point, Chair, you don't have to conclude there is harm. No, you can come to the conclusion that the works do not have an adverse impact on the character of the building.
That's why I said if harm.
Yeah, so if you amend what I've said to what the officers said, I'm quite happy with that. I know we've got some Latin in this report. I'm only a farm worker's son, you know, so I'll go along with it.
Oh, you're seconding. Do you wish to speak now?
No. Yeah, I'd also like to just ask the officer, in DM32, see this development, or this extension, looks well designed, which actually I believe meets the criteria for extending agricultural buildings in the countryside. Well, it's not, it's for, the farmer is there for agriculture, isn't he? So it's be building and extending dwellings in the countryside, DM32, okay. the existing form, okay?
Thank you, Councillor Wilby. I think that is fine if you leave the agricultural point out of it. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. I too think that the development is quite innocuous and links in with the kind of farm cluster, farm building clusters, which works. However, I come back to the point that the residential extensions supplementary planning document, ahead of its time, stated that residential expansions should seek to build in renewable energy generation and should also build in niches for wildlife. And I suggest that this could do with a bat tube in it. So if the mover is happy to accommodate those two policies, I'd be very happy to support.
Of course I am.
Try and move forward. Councillor Eve.
Yeah, it's all been covered and I'm happy to agree with what's been said.
Councillor Perry.
Okay. Yeah, I support this actually. I support what Councillor Mumford said. I mean, I do have experience because I live in a 17th century barn myself, barn conversion, so which has actually been extended as well as part. So I have no problem with this at all because part of my barn is 2-storey and part of it is single-storey. And I think this is quite a good conversion. So I go along with it and I support the approval. I'm sorry, officers, because I seem to have gone against every recommendation you've made tonight, but I think this should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't ask you about the size of your kitchens. Right. Gentlemen, before we finally tie this up, other than the conditions that Councillor Harwood has yes, I have got you, Councillor Atkinson, I am coming back to you, but I think there is an important point that we now need to address. If we're going to have an approval here, and it does seem like it, we have had a couple of conditions added, but I think we do need to consider whether there are any other conditions that we would wish to.
Yes, I mean, I think we said in the introduction that the existing conversion is of a high quality. And I think the drawings and the design reflect that previous approach. Nevertheless, we would want to ensure that the materials used and when the extension is delivered, that quality is maintained. So I think we would want a condition requiring details of the materials to be approved and signed off prior to commencement, but I suspect that won't be an issue. Councillor Harwood has asked for the birds, bats and bees boxes. Time limit, obviously standard condition. It's a modest extension, so we don't need to put a condition about its relationship to the house. I think that's absolutely fine. On renewables, I'm slightly hesitant about putting your PVs on a building of this character, but it seems that the applicant has a commitment to sustainability, so I'd be happy to invite a condition that required something other than PVs on the roof of a heritage asset, if that were possible.
I was thinking about what other approaches could be utilised, and I was actually thinking that if you look at some of the designs of solar PV these days, there is such good design that it's not the big shiny laminated things on the roof that it was in the old days, that there are some matte panels and so on that can be used that will work quite well. And actually, there's a lot of glass in this proposal anyway, which is quite shiny and quite modern. And I suggest a solution could be found. So I wouldn't want to rule out solar PV, but I think, as you say, it needs to be appropriate in terms of its impact and the materials involved. Thank you.
We have two more speakers. Councillor Kimmans.
Yeah, I think a majority of it has been said. Just something that John said. I don't live in a barn, but my mum always said I was born in one. So, and then Austin said about the bee boxes. Well, they're hives, actually, I think I find. So you wanted a bee brick, not a bee box. But most of it, what everyone else has said has covered what I wanted to say.
Very small hive or a very large brick. Yes, Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, Mr. Mack has already added in what I was going to say about bee bricks, so thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, that concludes that discussion. I think we're all clear on... Are we clear on everything? Okay, it's been moved and seconded with some additional conditions that we approve this application. Those in favour? I think that's everyone. Congratulations, it was worth coming. Okay. Thank you very much. So that should be one of the easier conversations we've had. We turn our attention briefly to the appeal decisions, which are a bit of a mixed bag at the rear of your agenda, and ask whether Austin has any comments to make on any of these.
Chair, no significant decisions in this group, to be honest. Cases for and against where inspectors took differing views about the relationship of extensions to the host property. A slightly disappointing decision is number 3, 139 Tonbridge Road. Apart from the overdevelopment of the site, Councillor Harwood won't like paragraph 21 of the inspector's decision, where the council requested measures for renewable energy, and the inspector said they weren't necessary to make the development acceptable. I'm not having a go, I'm just pointing out that you're better off doing it than inspectors. So. But otherwise, no, there was the final appeal decision on the back of the agenda is a refusal of a retrospective application for a commercial building in the AONB, and the inspector supported our view that the building would have a harmful impact despite its relatively small scale, but otherwise no significant.
Thank you very much indeed. Any quick comments or questions? In that case, members, parish councillors and others, thank you very much for your input for what has not been an easy meeting in some ways. Thank you very much for your contributions.